looks like we are live. Checking the settings. Okay, we're good to go. So today's topic is the noble lie, referring to a concept that comes from Plato's Republic. So I've read portions of Plato's Republic in translation, and I've heard some different people talk about sections of Plato's Republic. For example, you all have probably heard of the allegory of the cave. If people were likely to hear about any part of Plato's Republic in the 21st century, I would guess it would be this. So let's take a look at this really quick as we see who is going to join us today. So the allegory of the cave, or Plato's cave, is an allegory presented by the Greek philosopher Plato in his work Republic to compare, quote, the effect of education, pedagogia, and the lack of it in our nature. So here we'll skip to the summary. In the allegory, Socrates describes a group of people who have lived chained to the wall of a cave all their lives, facing a blank wall. The people watch shadows projected on the wall from objects passing in front of a fire behind them and give names. Ooh, that's an important note. Give names to these shadows. The shadows are the prisoner's reality, but are not accurate representations of the real world. So, that one bit about names here, that's interesting, which is to say, thinking about the allegory of the cave world. You're these people, suppose you're one of these people watching the shadows on the wall. You're able to talk about things in a way that your fellow prisoners could understand. So here, give names to the shadows. You and your shadow watcher buddies can all talk about what you're seeing. Who's that Pokemon? Who's that shadow? You could recognize the different shadows. However, the allegory of the cave is that these people do not realize that they're just watching a shadow show. Let's see if we could get some more striking visual on Google. We like pictures. Okay, so here, this one has color. So here's a person strapped to the wall. Then we have shadow operator. Looks like a YouTube deleted video. Okay, here's another picture we could look at. Whoops. Okay. So shadowy figures making a show. Prisoners at the wall. And then here you could have some people that realize there's just this shadow show going on, and they're able to exit the cave. So let's look at this final section. Socrates explains how the philosopher is like a prisoner who is freed from the cave and comes to understand that the shadows on the wall are actually not reality at all. A philosopher aims to understand and perceive the higher levels of reality. 3 higher levels exist: the natural sciences, mathematics, geometry, and deductive logic, and the theory of forms. So in this stream, we're not going to get into Plato's specific philosophy and how he perceives what's higher reality. Rather, we're going to focus on these mechanics of deception that he describes in the Republic. So, yes, philosopher, how do you get freed from the cave? And then when you are free from the cave, how is life different? This bit about names, I'll bring it up again. The people watch the shadows project on the wall from objects passing in front of a fire behind them and give names to these shadows. I think that's one of the key interesting insights just looking at this beginning of the Wikipedia article here, which is the people here that are watching the allegory, watching the shadow show and stuff, they might think that they're all clever and smart because they might know all these details of the shadow. But the allegory is, right, if they don't recognize that the reality in front of them isn't how stuff is really going on, knowing all the names and stuff of these shadows, is it knowing how to call something by what it truly is, or is it kind of false knowledge in a sense, because all you do is know more details about some kind of fiction? So that's Plato's allegory of the cave. And here we're going to treat another theme from Plato, the noble lie. So here from Wikipedia again, I just have a brief definition. And I'll just make a methodological note here. So I do a lot of stuff like pull up Wikipedia. And somebody might say, oh, that's not a real source, something like that. So let me just say a note about the methodology. I think that everybody knows of Wikipedia. So when I'm pulling up something from Wikipedia, the reason for that is to say, let us kind of take this societal consensus as a starting point for stuff. So a Plato scholar might certainly stand up and say, like, oh no, that's a bad definition, actually, and give their own definition. But if the Wikipedia is good enough for just illustration purposes, I don't see a problem with referring to Wikipedia, as it's a easily available, well-known website to go to stuff. We're joined by a friend, Reaper. What's up, Reaper? Looks like we might be joined by some robot advertiser, something too. I'll let our Reaper cut down the robots with this sickle of moderation. Okay. So, here's the Wikipedia definition for the noble lie. In politics, a noble lie is a myth or untruth, often but not invariably of a religious nature, knowingly propagated by an elite to maintain social harmony or to advance an agenda. The noble lie is a concept originated by Plato as described in the Republic. So if we go and we look again at the allegory of the cave picture, then these shadowy figures down here, these are the this is the media. These are the pawns of the elites, and they're putting on a show for all the normal people. Okay, so let us return here. So going off of this definition of the noble lie from Wikipedia, I just have some initial notes here we could talk about. So who are the elites? This is one of the tough things to pin down. So once again, looking at this picture, I think if we are to analyze some things happening in the world in a Plato's Republic type of way, one thing to consider is, like, look at how the elites, the controller, however you want to call them, are depicted here. Like, they're hooded, they're anonymous, they're kind of hard to pin down. And that's kind of intentional. So roughly speaking, we can say that those at the top of the establishment are the elites, but they can occupy many roles. So it's not just saying, oh, it's those blue people again, right? Because not so much as an identifiable group like that, but it's the structures themselves create a, how shall we say it? let's look at some more pictures instead of trying to describe them. So if we're talking about like computer stuff, let's look at how elite hackers depict themselves. There's tons of these images. If you search online, you want to feel like elite hacksaw. You just go on the internet and you could see all these like hooded people with these digits and numbers scrolling past them. Reminds you of the Matrix. Another place to see this is like if you go on YouTube, and I'm just gonna search like let's say, yeah, programming music. I see I got one right up here. We could even just look at this channel, but if I search something like programming music, you could kind of get the aesthetic for what it means to be ruling from the shadows in our current era. The sort of vibe that people want to put forth. Reaper says, did Plato have to hide in a cave so the establishment wouldn't persecute him? Yeah, so we could talk more about Plato and his time. I actually don't know very much about Plato, but a sort of thesis I'm putting forth is rather than like a Plato in a cave, right? In our current era, the form of Plato's cave and stuff is a lot of screens and internet. So the shadow show is going to be like you going on the interwebs, looking at your computers, and then certain people have the main levers of power to control what people see and don't see in those places. So it's not like literal shadows, but it is shadows, like the shadow show, in the sense that we have all these things, these shows presented to us. And the naming bit was interesting in the description from Wikipedia of the allegory of the cave, where the people who are watching shadow shows might know all sorts of names and stuff, be able to like recognize different shadows. In the same way, we could see in the shadow show presented to us, there's all sorts of details and things you could learn about the shadow show. Okay, so let's just look really quick at some aesthetics. So we got, this is like the kind of Tron-like aesthetic, so very dark except for this information highway wire stuff. Okay, we gotta not get copyright stricken for the music, but we do want enough to appreciate the vibes. Okay, here we go. Some elite hacksaw. We got some, computer C-level code type stuff going on. More shadows, maybe maps of the world, graphs with some kind of data. Let's see what other images we have here. That looks kind of like a potion here, so kind of throwback to alchemic stuff. And then the whole city is glowing. And then here, it's a person on the computer illuminated by the screen, and they're issuing instructions for the computers. So working thesis is like, this is the kind of modern version of these people here that are doing the puppet stuff. At least like one group of the people, the sort of technological controllers. So just looking at some more images here. Elite hackers targeting WHO's health thing spike, blah blah blah. Here's another kind of looking like a shadow wizard. You can see the word password. Looks like they're hanging out in some modern art exhibit. Anyways, I think that there is a distinct aesthetic being presented. Like, it's no accident that certain tropes are there. The art is made with a particular reason. So why are they always using dark themes instead of light themes? It's because the darkness I will argue it has a connection with this idea of space and the void. And then in that space and the void, then you get like information, zeros, ones, computer code and stuff that is organizing or programming that void, that mass. And then the people that might be operating within this, oftentimes, right, they're like these hooded people. Or even like, yeah, you get the anonymous mask, the Guy Fawkes mask, as part of this aesthetic sometimes. So not like one monolithic group that does everything, but you could look at individual kind of, I'll call them like cultural tropes, and we could look at their significance. George says, why the hoods? I think that the hoods is like a throwback to mysticism of some sort. So if I search images of like magicians or something, or oh no, there's too many TV shows called magicians. Let's add a word like medieval or something. You know, like this guy. Look, he's got a hood and he's like doing power stuff. So I think that the aesthetic with the hoods is kind of like you're a code wizard. Oh no, that you aren't supposed to use the Orthodox cross like that. That's bad. Don't do that. And then also like this other game, like the Assassin's Creed game. I actually haven't played these games, but I understand there's a lot of esoteric kind of conspiracy elements in these. I mean, the very name of the game is, Assassin's Creed, so the game is in some form or another about, intrigue and conspiracy. Anyways, you could see the hooded aesthetic, but not in the cyber context. So here are like different assassins in different ages, and you could see one of the defining features for most of these people is that they're shrouded by a hood of some sort. And then here, like with this Plato cave image, these people look similar, and it's kind of like they're doing a sort of dark ritual of some kind. Okay, so I'm saying that roughly speaking, the model we'll be working with for this particular stream is that the elites, right, they could be business people, politician, pop stars, basically any people that are involved with making this puppet show of some sort. So they benefit from the show going on in some way. All right, and then going back to this definition. So why would you propagate a noble lie? Well, it's knowingly propagated by an elite to maintain social harmony or to advance an agenda. So you might have heard this term social harmony used in the context of China. And in fact, that is one of our topics someone suggested here. Neoliberalism, Chinese model of governance, the harmonious society. The 和谐社会, also known as socialist harmonious society, is a socio-economic concept in China that is recognized as a response to the increasing alleged social injustice and inequality emerging in mainland China, and so on and so forth. So we don't have, or I don't have materials prepared to talk about this in depth, but that's just to say you might have heard this term social harmony in connection with China. Reaper says, hackers read hex codes. Yeah, well, we could look at more names for various technology stuff and see how it relates to like hermeticism and stuff. Like just off the top of my head, there's this program called Image Magic, and here you have this pretty goofy looking wizard here. But if we're taking this shadow show, puppet show analogy and running with it, think about it this way. If you have the ability to manipulate graphics to create effects, then you're kind of like the puppet show wizard, because you're controlling what's on the screen, the shadow screen, for all the people to see. So being able to manipulate images and videos and do all that sort of stuff, it falls right in line with the analogy here. So I don't know if you were just kidding, Reaper, but you're making a keen observation there. George says, hackers and wizards also read mysterious writings and glyphs. Yeah, that's another good point. And we could put this as a future topic too. Oh man, we're getting a lot of future topics. But if we look at what would the Babylonian script or the Enochian script be, kind of universal language, then the coding and the logic of the computers is one way to look at it. And we could also see how services like Google Translate, where you route your request through a central monolith thing, it's like this monolith thing mediates the communication and allows people that wouldn't otherwise be able to communicate with each other to be able to talk with one another. So through using technology, you kind of undo the Tower of Babel by making the tower itself a sort of translator. So there's all sorts of layers there. We could go into that at a different time. Reaper says, Alan, are you on Top Chat or Live Chat? I turn on Live Chat. I remembered you telling that to me, so I always make it a point to do that. Okay, Reaper. You said my Hex comment came after and was referencing George's comment. Oh, okay. I don't know why I read yours first before his. But close observation there. Indeed, you're right about that order. My asynchronous observer. You have correctly observed the sequence of the messages. Okay, so let's continue here. So social harmony, this term being used with China especially. In the United States, we don't so much talk about social harmony. Instead, we talk about freedoms and other things. But maybe in the near future, in the West, in the Anglo-speaking world, we too will start talking about social harmony. Okay, so what is the purpose? Why would anyone put forth a noble lie? Then by the Wikipedia definition, it's say the elites want to maintain social harmony or to advance some sort of agenda. So what might that sort of agenda be? Well, you've probably at least heard about some sort of like climate change hoax conspiracy theory, something along those lines. So to think like, let's make the earth less populous so we have all the national parks for ourselves. You could think of all sorts of agendas or things that a small group of people might want. If you don't like people, they're loud, they're messy, they get in your way. What if we just got rid of them? So I'm not going to prove that today and show, there is a Depop agenda or something like that. But that is to say, people do talk about these things, and you could look at the language in which this stuff is presented. So, for example, I'll just give one example really quick. Like, you wouldn't generally go up to someone and say, like, hey, do you want to, like, depopulate? But you could suggest to them something like family planning. And this, you could say, is a kind of euphemism. It sounds much more palatable, and people much more readily accept this. So here, you talk about prevent unintended pregnancy, plan your family, which basically is going to amount to planning it to be smaller. Another term I actually heard from some boomers is this term zero population growth used to be pretty popular in the past. So let's look really quick at Wiki. So it's talking about how do we affect the growth of the population. Okay, so here, this is why a boomer told me about it. We could look at this. In the late 1960s, ZPG, zero population growth, became a prominent political movement in the US and parts of Europe, with strong links to environmentalism and feminism. Yale University was a stronghold of the ZPG activists who believed that, quote, that a constantly increasing population is responsible for many of our problems: pollution, violence, loss of values, and of individual privacy. So this movement, people who believe it say too many people is the reason, the underlying reason why we have a lot of these problems. And I'll bring up like another example just from popular culture. You've probably seen the at least an image of the Avengers. What's the guy's name? Thanos with his gauntlet thing. And I think this is common enough that this isn't really a spoiler. Okay, so here this comic book character with the Infinity Gauntlet. Look, Infinity, Ouroboros, same things. They keep on popping up. Okay, but what is this about? Okay, the series of events are driven by Thanos, a nihilistic character. And what is he trying to do? Okay, at the start of the Infinity Gauntlet, the character Thanos has collected all 6 Infinity Gems. So these things, and attach them to his gauntlet. With their combined power, he becomes, quote, like a god, end quote, and sets out to win affection of Mistress Death, the living embodiment of death in the Marvel Universe. When Thanos uses his powers to instantly erase half of the life in the universe from existence, and so on and so forth. So I haven't proven to you that there's like a depopulation agenda. But let us just say, looking at stuff like Thanos, the Infinity Gauntlet, this zero population growth thing that really took off at Yale. You know, Yale, very suspicious place. Look up Skull and Bone Society, all sorts of stuff happening at Yale. That if you are talking about not just social harmony, but what sort of agenda might there be, then like one suggestion to look is like, well, you know, let's suppose that there were like some supervillain elites. What sorts of agendas might they push? And one of them might be, large depopulation of the Earth so they could have more for themselves. Okay, George says some big tech corps are offering to freeze eggs of female workers so they could keep working longer. Wouldn't be surprised if it becomes a government service in some countries. Yeah, so you could look at like how all sorts of policies and things that are being developed and encouraged. You could look at what the tech solution is, and I'm not even saying that these solutions don't work or that they're a bad idea in all cases, but you could look at the solutions that are being presented and then look at sort of the underlying dynamics and causes, such that if you did certain things, you wouldn't even need that technology. Meaning, and we'll be talking about this more later, like suppose you want to have a more healthy population. Well, we all know that just going outside, moving, eating healthy food, and getting exercise outside is good for you. So why is it that so many of the things that are being pushed and promoted for health don't have to deal with that very simple, natural, preventative thing for health? Instead, we just have like endless copes being presented. So we'll be looking more at that. But good example by George. Okay, so let us quickly get our classics education in for the day. So Latin word, we have this word nōbilis. That's where we get the English word noble from. And it literally means knowable or recognizable. So nosko is know or recognize, and then ibilis is the able part. So the noble is like knowable, recognizable, kind of like with the shadow things. You know the names of the different shadows. So there's a kind of fame, being able to name or recognize thing that goes with this topic. And then just some definitions from Wiki. Noble, highborn, distinct, able to be known, famous, celebrated. So I think just ever talking about what does it mean to be known or to have fame, one clear way I think is that someone's name is known. That's why you would be famous. Actually, I'll pull up the in like the Chinese papal language. We literally have the word. So we'll do Chinese today. If something is famous, you say it has name. So here, 有名 literally means have name, and the same word with the same roots is used in Korean yumyeong and Japanese yume as well. So shared etymologies between those Asian languages. But that's to say, noble, fame, knowing the name. Just associate those ideas if you encounter talk about fame and stuff. Knowing the name, recognizability. And what are you known for? What did you do? And so on and so forth. I think one thing that the Americans at least could recognize is, in the United States, there's all these famous people, and clearly they're not famous for their excellent virtue and stuff, but we just have like a lot of famous people for like, I don't know, being outrageous, being rich, making some music, but you might not even think it's the best music, but they still might be famous for their music. So that's actually a whole other category of stuff to look at. We could look at like fame and celebrities generally. That might be an interesting topic to go into in the future. Anyways, noble, noble, nōbilis. This word's associated with being recognizable or famous as well. Okay, and then the second word here from Greek, we have politia, which is the word for republic. So you hear Plato's Republic, the Greek title. The word that's used is this politia, and it means a state or a city or a government. So just a note, right? When we say, for example, democracy is under attack in the United States or something, ask the question, what specifically do I mean by democracy and what's under attack? Or like, oh, we're a Republican form of government. In what sense are we a Republican form of government? This general mistake that a lot of people could make is the word concept fallacy. Where, for example, if I said a line like, I don't know, okay, I'll just pull this up really quick. So equivocation, in logic, equivocation, calling two different things by the same name. Right, you might get mad at somebody if they say, for example, like Mark Zuckerberg is a communist or something, right? So in what sense do they mean communist? Depending on what somebody means, they might be expressing something different. So this is just a general communication issue where sometimes you have to talk with somebody, listen very carefully, and so on and so forth, and focus on not getting like gut reaction triggered and stuff, because oftentimes the senses of words are overloaded in all sorts of difficult to unpack ways, and especially if people don't know what they're talking about, distinctly, it could be hard. So we have a book called The Republic by Plato. Is it about Republican form of government? Is it about the Republican Party in the United States? You could trace the etymologies and look at how these things are related to the Republic. But, that's just one of the translations for the book. And, right, politia is the Greek term that's actually used. Actually, let's really quick, we'll look at the etymology of the word republic. Because I'm curious. I think it comes from res publica. With the lowercase r. Okay, yeah. Borrowed from Latin republica, ablative singular of res publica. Literally, the public thing. So res, I think, is thing. And then publica, public. So, the book, The Republic by Plato, is about the public thing. And then in Greek, politia, which sounds kind of like polis or even political. These two words are related to one another. So it's not about republic specifically, but it's about like government control, how different people are organized together. It's about something much more big and general. Okay, we get a note from George. He says, hackers and wizards both reject female companionship in order to pursue their arts. Yeah, okay, so a note about the wizards and stuff here. I think this actually is a good note too, relevant. If we look at even like secret agents, assassins, all these people, they aren't depicted as like family men, so to speak, or family women if you have a female assassin, right? They might be pursuing, sexual partners, and doing fornication and stuff like that. But the hacker, the wizard, the secret agent, these sorts of characters, it's not through constructing and building a family and just putting in labor and hard work that they do. Rather, it's through technology, intrigue, special knowledge, stuff like this. That is the path that they're seeking for advancing or succeeding in the world that they're operating in. You don't have like a secret agent story about a guy who works 6 days a week on his farm and does a plow, because there's nothing secret or hidden about that. It's just actively working, doing normal stuff under the sun. Whereas if you have a story about like a secret agent, an assassin or something, it's like, oh yeah, they have a secret bit of information, they're paid in order to take out this person that's connected with this and that, or it's the nature of the work, if you want to call it work, that they do is much different. Hello says, thanks Reaper, I reported both of the spammers. Oh, thank you. Hello police department. Hello police department, what's up? But that makes her comments disappear on my end, so I can no longer ban them. Hello says, Alan, wrong. You haven't played enough the AC series. They do actually go in to make family and community. Okay, I won't go into that. So I did say I didn't actually play the Assassin's Creed games. I bought them and they're sitting in my Steam library for me to play, but I haven't actually played them. So that's actually an interesting bit. Now I'm actually curious to see how that fits into the plot. Okay, hello ads, but yeah, it's really only at the retirement that they stop being assassins. Yeah, so they stop doing all their secret stuff, and then they retire from that sort of life. They withdraw from their world of intrigue, and then it would be like the end of the assassin part of the story if an assassin did end up retiring. Okay, so let us look. And Okay, so we looked at Greek word nōbilis and then Greek πολιτεία. Let us get into the noble lie. So I presented generally from Plato what the noble lie is about. Then I'm going to propose in our current era, what do you think is the noble lie of our era? Or are there multiple noble lies of our era? What are the main ones? Do you think that there actually aren't any noble lies in our era, and that actually everything is just as the establishment says it's so? Leave your comments, let me know, ask questions, but I'm going to propose a particular main narrative storyline about what the noble lie is. So feel free to counter and we could talk about this. So here's what I wrote. The main noble lie of our era is that of technology and progress. And let me blow this up a little bit so we could read. Namely, that by designing new machines, techniques, and more, we are somehow improving human life. Certainly, the way of life for most people has been transformed. On what criteria do we say we've made progress? So, technological progress, if we explored an Allen stream and reading Jacques Ellul's book, The Technological Society. Oops, the italics got messed up here. So, The Technological Society is the raison d'être, or reason for existence of the form of much of the developed world. So my argument is, what is the noble lie? It's that of technological progress. And why is that being advanced? Well, it's the organizing principle for society based on technology, specialization, that sort of thing. And what sort of agenda might there be in mind? Maybe depopulation of some sort. So all very loosely laid out there, but fitting the model. So let's go back. That's the noble lie. So if you get people to believe in technology and progress, then they'll be able to accept, or at least rationalize or cope, whatever you want to call it, with all these changes that are being foisted upon them, even if these things are actually lies or they're bad for them. So it's noble in that by accepting this, you could build out and structure in a society around these things. The elites could build their vision of the future, but it involves some lying. Okay, so big claim. So let's look at some more of how we could say the technology and progress stuff. How is that a lie? So why I say that progress due to technology is a lie? Certainly we've developed new technologies, so no one's going to say like, oh yeah, airplanes are a lie. There aren't actually airplanes. Like, clearly there are airplanes. So we're not lying and saying that there's no airplanes, okay? But the progress part is where you could say that promises aren't delivered. So I just came up with a short list of things that are affecting people directly, and you could decide for yourself whether or not we've made progress in these areas. So, for instance, health, and we can include like mental health stuff here too. How are people handling day to day? Do people have a will to live, to fight for the next day? What's happening? How are people doing? You could find countless things that are just talking about how unhealthy and miserable, especially Americans are. Americans are a famous punching bag for this sort of thing. And one thing I would say to that is, is it just that overnight people became, or not overnight, but over generations, did people just become like lazier? They became stupider. They just started to make poor choices. Or we could even look at how the environment presented to people invites them to take on lifestyles and take in things that make them become a certain way, because they're just naively trusting people that tell them to do this. Okay, just a couple more. Aesthetics and beauty. So a lot of people like to listen to music or look at art from other eras versus today. So have we made artistic progress in developing and being able to depict beautiful forms, or do we just spiral into deconstruction land? That's a question to ask yourself about progress. Another one, alleviating the suffering of the poorest people. So around like my city, I talked to people who've lived here for a while, and clearly now we're seeing at least a local spike in homelessness. There's a lot of homeless people in a lot of places. Another one, work hours. So you could see recent discussions on remote work, work-life balance, and so forth. If all these technologies are supposed to help us have more leisure time because we have more abundance, should we be able to work less? But what are we finding? In many cases, with stuff like hustle culture, the hype beast, we're seeing that people are working more and more hours. And then as a final point here, I put in ecology, including green energy. So these tech solutions we make to pollution often themselves create more pollution, industrial waste, and so on, destroying the earth rather than participating in natural and renewing cycles. All right, so I just said a bunch of spicy things. Let's look at some pushback comments that I could expect. Okay, so Reaper says, you are claiming there is a singular bad noble lie. No, I'm not complaining that there's only one singular lie, but I'm saying that this is one of the overarching big narratives. So, of course, there's lots of individual little side quests, whatever you want to call them, but I'm saying that telling people to basically believe in the current establishment, the current program, is often centered around similar things. Let's see. I'm not sure what a noble lie is. Reaper sounds like the concept of the big lie. Is that a film or something? The big lie, or do you just mean it's a big lie? Reaper says, I do not think Plato's noble lie is about hoodwinking a populace to achieve an incredible result that is bad for them, but rather it is to generally lead society in a good direction. Yeah, so Reaper, here's where I would say, I'm not disagreeing with what you're saying, but the question, and this is where the philosophy, the big questions come up, which is to say, what is a good direction for society? So I'll scroll back up to the definition here. In politics, a noble lie is a myth or untruth, often but not invariably of a religious nature, knowingly propagated by an elite to maintain social harmony or to advance an agenda. So, for example, you could say that maybe the elites, right, the shadow people, they conclude that most people are so dumb and stupid that they actually cannot face big, tough, normal reality out there. So if we want to actually give them the best happiness we can, the best social harmony, so you could look at it through like a utilitarian lens. Maybe they're saying, yeah, if we just leave people to their own devices, people will kill each other and all sorts of bad things will happen. So rather than that, what we do is we steer society, we keep people in a socially harmonious arrangement such that we could all share in maximum abundance. So that's, I think, one of the reasons why Plato's republic, this noble idea, remains such a compelling, discussed topic, right, down through the ages, is that you could see how somebody who is in the position of the shadow show people, right, they might actually be wanting to like provide and give people a comfortable life. For instance, they say like, I don't want there to be more suffering than there has to be. How do I give people a comfortable life? And their conclusion to that, leading society in a good direction, might mean social harmony for somebody. So they might say it's like, rather than having people face or have to deal with certain tough things, what would be better for everybody is this socially harmonious society. So even if people live much of their lives in ignorance, me as shadow operator, I'm actually being a compassionate shadow operator. Hello says, Alan, I think we could look at fundamentals a bit more. Free speech is an abstract concept. On the other hand, not getting mugged by criminals is more concrete. Tech has reduced violent crime massively. And then Reaper's talking about how the noble lie, it's noble. So it's not just like, oh yeah, the terribly most evil people are just doing like really bad things. First off, that's not going to sell. But second off, like, why would anybody, how could they get away with that? So there has to be some kind of appeal into some kind of lie for somebody to accept it. So we're just talking about like the mechanics of lying now. So for example, if we're talking about like one method that somebody might lie, but kind of lie would be like using some sort of flattery, right? So giving somebody a compliment, trying to make somebody feel good in some sort of way, somebody might lie and do that sort of thing. And you ask them why, it's like, well, it brightens up people's day if they hear a nice word. Now, if that nice word that you give is like a flattering word, a lie, one might say that is not right to do. But then the person that does that might say like, oh no, this is how we spread social harmony and happiness or something. So in that sense, like, it has the noble aspect in that there could be all sorts of good intentions mixed in with a bad methodology. So the bad methodology being lying, but you could be doing that, for example, to try to serve or cater to people's needs, something like that. Yeah, Hello says, indeed, Reaper, that's what makes the lie noble, because it has good intentions, right? So that's why I think Hello says it well here, that's why it's even an issue to begin with. If it was just like so clear cut, like that's bad, then there wouldn't even be a discussion. But there is a kind of discussion to say like, all right, we know people could be misled in this and this and this way. Would it actually be better to lie a little bit and to help run things more smoothly, something like that. Reaper says, Wikipedia says, in politics, a noble lie is a myth or untruth, often knowingly propagated by an elite to maintain social harmony or advance an agenda. Okay, so you pulled out the definition that I was using. Noble is not spelled N-W-O. Oh man, we have the 21st century rhetoric school here. Okay, and then Reaper sends me a link to this big lie thing. Okay, we're going to dare to leave YouTube. The glossaluga, a gross distortion or misrepresentation of the truth, used especially as a propaganda technique. So I think this sort of thing, it has a more obviously bad connotation. Like, you pull this up and you show a picture of Mustache Man. Obviously, Wikipedia is saying this really bad, really bad. Whereas on the other hand, something like the noble lie, right? It's a different story. I'll bring up too this what's that YouTube channel? Kurtz Gesatz. This channel. They recently did this video that I watched and a couple people watched. So in my opinion, I think this channel is like UN scientism, propaganda, high budget, actually really high production quality, slick cartoon channel. That's to say, I'm not behind the messages that are put on this channel, but I gotta tip my fedora, to their artistry and say that they are good at what they do on this channel. Anyways, they recently did this video that you might want to look at, you all viewing this, called We'll Lie to You and We'll Do It Again. And it talks about like science and models and all these sorts of things. But I bring this up because it's related to this idea of what does it mean to lie? How is it a noble lie? One of the ways you might say something is like a noble lie in that it's like you simplify a situation. It's like, really, we're experts, we're smart, stuff is really complicated, but in order to get people to accept what we're telling them, then we have to repackage it in a kind of noble lie, for sake of expediency. Okay. Reaper says, you are inserting NWO themes like elite shadow governments, U and Depop memes into a phrase that was not used to describe negative stuff like that. My dude, Reaper, that's why we're doing a stream on this, to show how they're related. And you would say, like, you talk about a noble lie or something. Look at Plato's allegory of the cave. So suppose something like that is the mode of operation of our current world. Ask the question, what form would it take? How would it look? Hello says, I think I'm missing some context as well. What policy context did Plato argue this in? Was it about crushing the uppity slaves of Athens or improving conditions for them? It's too broad. Reaper says, yes, and if the elites are depopulating the world, then that's a big lie and not a noble lie. And then Reaper's looking at the Kurzgesagt's channel. Wow, has 17 million subs, and their graphics look like a fun Mario game. Yeah, really, really slick and clean graphics. Yeah, so let us not get too hung up about okay, big lie versus noble lie. So what I'm saying about this is big lie, clearly as Wikipedia presents it, right, it has this really, really bad connotations with it. Whereas the noble lie, it's a bit more ambiguous. But think about this. What if the noble lie is the big lie? That's the question. Like me personally, I think you don't lie, you don't deceive. That's bad news. You don't do it. You don't even noble lie. But that's right. That's what I'm saying. But you look at how does noble lie stuff happen, and how might somebody who thinks that they're just doing the noble lie end up doing the big lie? That's the question of the hour, and what we're exploring in this stream. Okay. So here, as I said, I propose in a general outline what kind of form would the noble lie of our time take. I was saying one of the things that you might be trying to sell is that all the ways in which we're transforming society is creating progress of some kind. So the people that are promoting this view, you might really believe it. Like you all gave some examples of saying, like, yeah, freedom of speech, for example. I think Hello gave an example of how, if I say something naughty on the internet, I might get banned from Google, but, I don't think anyone's going to come through the door and, like, point a gun at my head. I don't know. Who knows what the future holds? But that's just to say that you could look and try to find ways and say, like, yes, indeed, we made progress in some respects. So I'm not denying that there hasn't been, like, any areas of any improvement anywhere. But that's why I just bring out these areas broadly to say we look at our age compared to other ages and the attributes about it. Clearly, we have a lot of new problems. So maybe in some areas we got better, in other areas we got worse. But that's to say, if ultimately it kind of evens out, then that would also be supporting the position that there hasn't really been progress. Rather, we've seen a transformation of society. A lot of some things are harder, some things are easier. But is it clearly, unequivocally better? I would say no. That's my own position. All right. Hello says, working in the banking profession only because Christians were banned from that previously, of course, not by choice. Okay, so talking about Mustache Man and those issues. I am not going to actively discuss the specifics of Mustache Man on YouTube, nor is it a topic that I personally am going to dive into deeply, because it just seems like it would be trouble to be associated. Like, if you ended up becoming sympathetic to Mustache Man, that would spell trouble. And then if you're already saying Mustache Man really bad, well, then you already, there's a lot of people that have done really bad stuff. So to know a lot of specifics about Mustache Man, but say not Pol Pot, why not investigate Pol Pot or someone else? Look at another specific thing. So I don't have my own axe to grind with Mustache Man, so I'm not going to dive into him myself. Looks like Hello just got some censorship. See, that's what I'm saying. Like, on YouTube, we don't even try to do that. Like, I have no problem, if I met somebody from Germany or someone who was really interested in looking at the history and talking about this, I would have no problem. Be a very interesting conversation. But we know that there's certain loaded things that we just can't talk about openly on YouTube or freely. On the other hand, if we talked about like Thailand or Tibet or something, then we might actually be able to have a much more free discussion. All right, let's continue. So technological development persists as the main reason, often under names like innovation, envisioning a such and such future, or the constant disruption of modern life. So if you search terms like disruptive technology, you'll find a lot of futuristic rhetoric. So if we're saying, okay, so how would a noble lie kind of take on a almost religious tone sometimes? So I'm just going to do this right now. Look up disruptive technology, and we'll look at Investopedia. What's this? HBR.org. Oh, Harvard Business Review. So you could read these long sagas of the advanced, the heroic conquering, the mastery of technologies, publications, Harvard Business Review and stuff. I would say that these are often maybe the brains, one of the central places you could learn about these things. Reaper jokingly on this show, he mentioned like, oh, does Alan have like a foreign policy magazine subscription? So oftentimes, yeah, these like big, rather maybe academic is a correct word to talk about them, type publications are often very indicative of top-down efforts. And you'll literally have business people that go down and say like, okay, here are our core objectives. Now, what sort of things do we need to get done in order to have people to have this and this attitude to do this and this and this? Like, that's what a lot of management consultant type people do. So let's look at just a couple headings here. Got 3 ways to be more inclusive colleague, how ranking performance can hurt women, electronic health records can improve the organ donation process, feedback isn't enough to help your employee grow. What is this about? Instead of feedback, is it about gamification and incentives? Let's see what this is about. Of all forms of communication, feedback is perhaps the hardest to give and receive. The giver has to criticize, which might hurt someone's feelings, so they avoid having the conversation in the first place. And if the conversation does occur, the recipient is likely to feel shame, hearing some version of "you're not good enough and you need to change." So if feedback doesn't help people up their game, then what does? The authors offer 4 steps to shift from a culture of feedback to a culture of coaching. So shift from critic to ally. Hey, I'm on your team. Help people grow, empathize, express confidence, ask permission, identify an energizing outcome, discover a hidden opportunity, create a level 10 plan. Okay. So, just going back to what would the sort of noble lie be? So for some more cultural things, not just like we all become cyborgs, but these ideas too of like a more inclusive society, more diversity in the workplace. Like a lot of these ideas too, those will be the story of progress, saying the workplace has gotten better because the male-female ratio is more even or something. Therefore, the workplace has gotten better. These are other sorts of ways in which disruption. So there's old pattern. We made progress because look, it changed in this way. So that's more of how progress is defined and how it is pushed. Okay. Reaper says, I think we've just seen the noble algo at work. Yes, the noble algo wants to make sure that there's no hate in our chat. But, even without the noble algo, we will not perpetuate hate here. Alan's stream is a safe space. Hello says, I was commenting about the rhetoric of elites in itself is dangerous, an excuse for strife. That's an interesting point you make here. Hello, if you stick around for the stream, I think you might be interested to hear, I do give some concrete recommendations or responses to a lot of the stuff. So this is a whole nother question. So suppose you do believe, you accept the general broad strokes of my analysis, and it's like, all right, there's a noble lie and stuff going on. So what do you do in response to that, right? Some people, and I think this actually goes along with the hacker aesthetic. So if we look at all that Guy Fawkes mask stuff, then some people say okay, we find out that there's all this bad stuff, shady activity, then what do? We do revolution, right? And I think that as you're saying, hello, the rhetoric of elites in itself is dangerous. These images here are presented so people have that idea. It's like you find out that you start targeting a small group of elites and stuff, then before you know it, people are going to have flaming torches, and they're going to be going down the street, and they're going to be causing mass panic, and there's going to be witch burnings. So here, very, very good American history topic here. It's like the whole witch burning scare thing. I think that's a enduring trope of, okay, I'll title it now, fear of conspiracy or naming elites leads to irrational behavior and witch burning, whether literal or figurative. And that is you have received the inoculation for criticism of the elites. So very astute response by Hello that aptly illustrates some points that we'll get into more later. Okay, Reaper says, censored it even though you're a mod. Right, you see in Alan's stream, even the elite mods don't get special privileges from the rules. The algocracy applies to us all. Reaper says, elites is definitely socioeconomic class warfare. Way better to discuss specific people and their actions. Right, so Reaper, I'll just say of this is though where this is where stuff and we're getting into this with the crypto stuff. So like consider a institution such as the Federal Reserve, something like that. So there's a lot of people who say it doesn't actually really matter who is in charge of the Federal Reserve. A lot of people didn't want the Federal Reserve System to be put in place. There was a big, thick book I started to read, but it was too long. The Creature of Jekyll Island book. Anyways, you could say 4.8 stars, almost 3,000 reviews. Maybe I should just read it. I could feel smart. I could actually do my homework and look at this. But that's to say that, so we do have a lot of people in a lot of positions of power, and it's not even that them specifically is the problem. It's like we don't even want their position to exist. But as libertarians will point out, for instance, that government rarely gets smaller. It just keeps on getting bigger and bigger. So talking about like elites as a socioeconomic class, I think it's not a dumb issue to look at how the form society itself takes creates, well, it's what you would call like structural inequality or something, or like, you know, even something like institutional racism or something like that, in that the system itself, by its very nature, no matter who occupies that role, sets stuff up to be ruled by an elite or something like that. So it's not even that like certain elites are uniquely bad people that need to be criticized, but rather that the system itself is creating positions and stuff that if we had to redo all of society from scratch, we would not even have these positions existing. Okay, Hello says, the real Guy Fawkes, referenced multiple times in V for Vendetta, was a terrorist, wanted to replace the Protestant parliament with a Catholic fundamentalist one. Basically, under the Pope's rule, he was not a freedom fighter. All right. We too could look into some of these British topics. I don't actually know very much about him. Reaper says, getting a bit scared. It seems we cannot discuss the algocracy because the noble algos are preventing our conversations. Yeah, Reaper, you got to be creative and use symbols and rhetorical skill to get around it. As skilled human communicators, we could overcome these problems. Reaper says, it matters 100% who is in charge of the Fed. Wrong person, society melts down. But I think you might be referencing more that somebody has to be in charge of the central bank. Doesn't mean that person is misusing their position. Regarding talking about elites, we typically think guilt by association is bad. We want to understand who specific people are and what they're doing. Be okay if someone said these 100 specific people are doing XYZ, blah, blah, blah. Okay, Reaper, so the general point I'm making is, if we're talking about, let's just say we're looking at democracy, Republican type government, like in the United States versus a monarchy, okay? Let's compare these two. And I'm talking in very broad strokes. We're not gonna get into weeds here of the political science, but just for illustrative purposes. So the nature of like a monarchy is that the government is represented in a monarch, the person. So if all sorts of stuff is going wrong with it, then, you know, it's kind of on the king or the monarch who's supervising the thing, and as like a head of state, whether stuff is going good or bad, it reflects on them. So if a king wants to be remembered as a good king, a benevolent ruler, then they would like society to go well. And like we could talk about Confucianism and stuff too. So if it's like a hierarchy, then a minister would want their region to boast, you know, the best trade and stuff. Now, the nature of like a Republican democratic sort of system is that rather than having power vested in people, it's trying to create like it's a predecessor to algocracy, in the sense that you're trying to come up with a system whereby you have a position as a president, and you're trying to limit the powers of each specific position, and really make a kind of complex system to make sure that different parties cycle in and out to express some will of the people or something. So the nature of the system is very impersonal, in the sense that, yeah, we could, I think it's fair to talk about, was this president better than this president with respect to economy or, indigenous rights or whatever. You could have those sorts of discussions, those sorts of evaluations. But I think too that, rightly so, like a lot of people would say, oh yeah, the nature of a democratic Republican type system is that you're in a constant like revolution, in a sense. Like people are always trying to campaign for this, campaign for that. So the nature of the system is sort of anti-stability. So a lot of different topics here, but related like to the Federal Reserve topic, for instance, certainly, there could be a better or a worse person in that sort of position. But when we're talking about political science or something, comparing the different sorts of systems that one might have, then you could say that maybe the actual best system would be to not even have this, chair of the Federal Reserve position at all, and instead have like, a national treasury with a bunch of gold in it or something. So I'm not going to argue one position or another, but I think that, right, the whole point of studying politics or something is to look at how these different systems work, and find out, just because, I'll put it this way, just because we are in America or the West, wherever you are under a particular sort of system, you have to operate with what you're given. But I personally am not going to assume that just because I'm born in a particular sort of system and I have bread to eat, that I'm in the best sort of possible system ever. I think that's a little bit of a leap. Though, I'm going to be a lawful citizen and operate within the system that has been given to me. All right, Reaper's typing some paragraphs. Let's see what Reaper has to say. Okay, so some specific responses to the monarchy democracy example that's being given. So I'm not here to argue specifically democracy bad, democracy good, monarchy bad. We could put that for another future topic. We could talk about political science, different forms of government. But what I'm saying is, let's study the current system we have now and understand properties of it. So one of the properties of our current form of government is that positions are supposed to be not connected with people. That's why like Orange Man Bad was such a scare for a lot of people, because it was like there's this noble office of the presidency, and if it seems like Orange Man is usurping that and becoming a dictator, then that's like the worst thing in the world, because our democracy is under attack, something like that. Who knows? Maybe in 20 years we'll be saying our decentralized autonomous organization is under attack. They're attacking our sacred, quote, decentralized autonomous organization. That is an intolerable assault upon our algocracy. We have so much logic and science based into our algocracy that somebody would go against the algocracy. That is an affront to human technical progress and science. In 20 years, will we see that? I don't know. Maybe if it happened. Would you be surprised? Would I be surprised? Question to ask. Okay. So, yeah, then going on about the noble lie. So, in what sense could you say that, like, a lot of the progress we have is not really progress? You could take a specific example and say, like, is it really free speech in the United States? And I think, Hello brought up, like, a very valid point to say that are people actually getting like rounded up and shot for having particular opinions? In the United States, I would say, thankfully, at least among people I know, no, that's not the case. So that's a good thing that's not happening right now. On the other hand, are people getting silenced and banned and all that in other sorts of ways? And is this a trend that you want to continue? I think anybody watching this stream would agree that you wouldn't want that to continue, though we'll get more into how security and misinformation and all of that fits into this picture and how the noble lie is related to all of that. So, yeah. Anyway, so there's a lot of stuff, though. We're supposed to be a representative democracy in the United States, but all sorts of stuff happens that we don't really have a say over. So, for example, let's talk about communication technology and like cell phone towers and stuff. So, can you decide whether or not you're doused in all sorts of radiation? Basically, the answer is no. You could decide personal stuff like, oh yeah, I don't carry a cell phone and hold it up to my skull. I don't use Bluetooth headphones, whatever. But there's a lot of stuff that, whether you like it or not, people are going to put out certain infrastructure. People are going to do certain things. You walk into a parking lot and there's like these huge towers on all the buildings near you. It's not your property. You don't control it. Even if you really did like it, could you tell them to get rid of it? Basically, no. It's going to be there whether you like it or not. And, yeah, so in this sense, there are a lot of stuff that's just happening to us whether you like it or not. And I would say in many ways that's always been the case. So I'm not saying that we're uniquely bad in this situation. But if somebody's saying like, oh, yeah, in China, they might just do this and this, and you have to do it because the government says so. Well, in the liberal West, it's the same thing, except it takes different forms a lot of the time. All right. So some pushback from our Reaper. He says, you're saying stuff nonchalantly, but there are local governments that control where cell towers, phone towers get to be. Around people prevent them all the time. Yeah, so you could have local areas where there's relatively more or relatively less autonomy. And that's one of the interesting parts about the United States specifically, is that we're the United States, but, talk to people from different states. I think it's pretty accepted that you get a lot of different cultures and ways of doing things in different places. In California, what we like to do is we like to move out of California, move to other places, make them more like California, complain about how things are getting worse, and then repeat that process. Right? That's the kind of Californian way. Okay. So, maybe you all don't accept everything I've said, but just as long as you at least understand this general premise of, okay, what could a noble lie be? And then what form might it take for people? And I propose one way in which, in our times, a noble lie might be presented in the form of progress generally. So technological progress, but more broadly, even progress of equality and these other objectives. You could fit it in there as well. But you could then go and look at the actual facts, for example, health, aesthetics, work hours, so on and so forth, and you could say, have we actually really made progress, or has the form of things just changed? You could ask yourself that question. Me personally, I think that overall, I would say we have not made progress, and therefore I think that rhetoric and stuff about progress is a kind of noble lie. That's my own view. All right. So let's just talk briefly about how does storytelling happen a lot of the times in the media. So if you're going to have a noble lie, you're going to try to tell people a certain sort of story, maybe even of a kind of religious nature. You're gonna have the puppet show. In what forms are you going to do that, and how do you learn about what sort of stories and strategies are effective? So there's a lot of things you could do. From the side of like people that would be put in the positions to design these puppet shows, if we're going to take the allegory of the cave analogy and run with it, one of the things that you do is business research, basically. So you could come up with like a plan. You could say, this is how we approach customers. This is what we're going to do in this scenario. So you come up with a plan, and then you anticipate all sorts of different ways in which an audience would react or people would react, right? And then you could prepare the necessary things to respond to those events when they actually happen. So a kind of general word for this would be war games. So here's the wiki on that. A war game is a game that realistically simulates warfare as opposed to abstract games such as chess. Wargaming may be played for recreation, to train military officers, the art of strategic thinking, or to study the nature of potential conflicts. Many wargames recreate specific historic battles and can cover either whole years or any campaign battles or lower level engagements within them. Many simulate land combat, but there are wargames for naval and air combat as well. So this is like very literally talking about warfare, but you could also consider how you might do wargaming on, say, a mind game level or a cyber level, right? How might, instead of missiles and things that people are launching at each other, how might people launch like, denial of service attacks at each other or something? So nowadays you'll hear a lot of talk about cyber warfare. I do a search for it, cyber warfare. I'm going to get tons of results. Yeah, look, Rand Corporation. Let's look at Rand. They probably have some cool graphics. Cyber warfare involves the actions by nation states or internal organizations to attack or attempt to damage other nations' computer or information networks. So, obviously, talking about cyber warfare is a thing these days. It's a battle. And there's lots of other things that are referred to as battles in similar ways. So, for example, if I search for, the battle against what, then of course you're going to find tons of stories that talk about fighting this joint enemy in sort of battle terms. So wargaming, specifically historically, you could look at how it's been used to literally model planes and all that. But more broadly, wargaming could be used to do all sorts of strategies, including things like in America, like let's say if you want to model a corporate acquisition or something, then you could probably find like all sorts of, right? You would do a similar sort of thing in business. So here we have how to build a merger model. So just like how you might plan out a airplane strike or something. In a similar way, you might say, we're Facebook, right? Now, how do we actually build out the metaverse? How do we do this campaign where, right, this competitor here, how do we acquire this? Hello says, I love the photo of a completely green user interface on the RAND cyber war page. Why are hackers typified like this? Yeah, it's just like the hood thing, you know? There's definitely a distinct aesthetic that is consistently presented with like cyber warfare and stuff. Anyways, so I bring up how here my main point is that war games, stuff like that, it doesn't just mean war like tanks and airplanes fighting each other. You could also look at how, especially in America, big business. Well, I won't say especially in America. I'm in America, and there's a lot of big business in America. That's why I'm talking about America. But you can see how businesses and stuff, right? They'll do things like build a merger model, or probably at the high level CEOs and stuff, Facebook, Twitter, whatever. They probably do all this sort of stuff. And what do you do? You make acquisition assumptions. So similar to saying like, okay, if we move the tanks here, then this terrain, it'll cost this and this much. It'll have to have this much supplies to feed the troops and so on. And the same way, you could say like, all right, we'll bid at this number, so they're likely not to accept that, but we could have them reach this in a negotiation and so on and so forth. Making projections. So you might say like, okay, we're Facebook. Probably around this time of the year, Instagram's revenue is going to go down a little bit because of this and this. So that might be a good time to buy and so on and so forth. Valuation of each business, company combination and pro forma adjustments, blah, blah, blah. So all sorts of stuff you could look at, like the legal climate, your competition, and so on and so forth. But very warlike in many ways. So what sort of stories might be told in a kind of nōbilis scenario? You could have all sorts of war stories. That's one of them. And you could see how people could plan out and come up with specific scenarios and then roll out the plans that they made. So a kind of infamous thing in recent memory, I'll just bring up here about event 2-0, the number that comes after 0. It was a tabletop exercise that simulated a series of dramatic scenario-based facilitated discussions confronting difficult true-to-life dilemmas associated with response to a hypothetical but scientifically plausible big disaster thing. 15 global businesses, government, and public health leaders were players. So it's a real life, they're LARPing together in the simulation exercise that highlighted unresolved real world policy and economic issues that could be solved with sufficient political will, financial investment, and attention now and in the future. So these things, you and I don't get invited to them unless you're maybe working at a university and directly in the pipelines that lead to these places to be able to make these decisions. And they're looking for skilled players of these sorts of games to be able to help them carry out their business plans. All right. And then an article from an Indian newspaper. And so in the past year, when people found out about the particular thing that I showed here, a lot of eyes turned to this man and related parties. It was like, it's almost as if you guys were thinking about and planning all of this for a long time. And if you're a coincidence theorist, it'll be like, no, we're just trying to be prepared and stuff, just in case something happens. So I won't make any specific claims there, beyond saying that one of the methodologies that you might do is, in order to be consistent, in order to be coherent, if we're going to do something tell a noble lie to maintain social harmony or to advance an agenda, there's a lot of like planning and preparation that you have to do. And if you're working with a lot of different people, you also want to make sure that as many people as you can get are on the same page. Because if you start having people contradicting themselves or contradicting other people, then you might lose in presenting the noble lie, because people will see the cracks in the matrix, so to speak, right? They'll see, oh, wait a minute, these details aren't quite lining up like you initially presented them. So it seems kind of loose and sloppy. It seems like kind of bullshitting me. Whereas on the other hand, you take the time to rehearse, to plan out ahead of time, and you have everybody carry stuff out like a well-rehearsed fire drill, only it's a really big fire this time, then you could get everyone in lockstep. So, what are some tools that are available to learn about stuff? So war games is kind of like a model or a simulation. Planning, it's just like you release a movie or something. So you think, what would the audience like? You could plan a show, you could prepare things, anticipating how people will respond, and then strategically design a program that you think will succeed. So if you're going to spend millions and millions of dollars, you're going to want to succeed at what you're doing. Reaper says, do you think the methodology of wargaming is inherently evil, or would you suggest using it in your ideal government? So one thing I had here as a note, I'll just say it because I don't want to scroll and find it now, is that, there's nothing wrong with like being prepared or anticipating and planning and trying to do the right thing, So, for example, if you and your family have a plan in case there's a flood or a tornado or something, and then you kind of have like a war game exercise drill to say like, oh yeah, if a tornado comes, then this is what we do. We make sure that these items are here, and we'll put this bag in the car. Like that just sounds like sensible, good, normal stuff, right? So in this way, I would say that I don't think that the problem that wargaming itself and coming up with plans for scenarios and trying to figure out what works against against a fire or something, I don't think that that's inherently bad. Though I would say that just like any tool, it's like you could use a car to do good or you could use a car to do bad, right? So these things are tools or techniques, and you can use them for pretty bad purposes. That's what I would say. But these methods and their efficiency is known, right? So to just know and talk about how a lot of stuff actually happens, that's one of the things that we try to do on this stream, right? So it's not saying like, oh, Bill over there, he's the bad guy, he's doing a bad thing, but to know that people do have long-term vision, planning out, making decisions, where and when do people meet with each other, kind of looking at the higher level of how stuff works has been helpful for me, because if you're too myopic, focused on your little thing, and you don't see how bigger trends work, then you might be caught off guard if you yourself don't know how you want to respond to stuff. Okay, Hello has an astute comment here. He says, I think conflict is a popular metaphor in general, and war is an obvious example. Look at cancer, for example. There's words like beating, fighting, surviving, etc. Violent imagery, it works well. I would say bringing in war is natural to anything where a conflict metaphor works. And business and capitalism is all about competition, just like making war. So Hello, I said this is an astute comment because this is the approach pushed all over the West. Now, I'm not saying that. I'll just say, for example, businesses. Are business necessarily competing with each other? In a certain sense, yes, but in another sense, no. Like, just hypothetically, imagine you have a farm and I have a farm. We don't actually have to be necessarily competing with each other, um, because let's say I'm self-sufficient and you're self-sufficient, or we grow different things and then we give each other some of our surpluses. So I don't think that there's an inherently what you might call like a zero-sum game involved with a lot of stuff. Though for a lot of fields, yes, like, talk about sports teams. The nature of having a tournament and sports teams is it is kind of conflict-based, winner takes all scenario. So I would say that one of the defining features of like American society, I don't know so much about Europe, is that like a love or a desire for all sorts of this competition with other people, not just me competing with myself, but me competing with other people, is a very big deal. And let's see, there was one other thing I wanted to bring up. Okay, yeah. So I was going to say, a lot of this machine learning adversarial network. So you're saying that these war metaphors are everywhere, and indeed that's true. If you look at like our latest technology, machine learning type stuff, for example, one popular approach you'll learn about if you look into machine learning is stuff like generative adversarial networks. And you think about how did a lot of AI technology come about? It was like training a computer to play, millions of chess games against itself, that sort of thing. So you have some problem like you frame some sort of problem as a kind of adversarial problem. That is the methodology to solve things with a lot of like machine learning type technology. So I think, Hello, you make a good point that it is a very general thing, this kind of war-like language or metaphor being applied in all sorts of problem domains. All right. So Reaper says, but it seems like you are questioning people that were wargaming known possible events. We know we can't discuss specifics on YouTube. Hello says, just like, they're not all alike really, and most of us wouldn't last 5 minutes in a war without peeing our pants. War metaphors are kind of a turn off when I see them in writing. Yeah, well, I think being in a war, as in like hot war with violence, of course, all that stuff is really terrifying to us for reasons that do not need explanation. Hello says, I remember telling my hairdresser in Greece about 2 others that opened down the road. He wasn't worried because it shows there's a demand and more people who want haircuts will see him too. Yeah, I think like another example of this would be if there's like a bunch of good restaurants that are near each other, then people say it's a popular area where a lot of people come and gather and they'll go to these different restaurants. So if the restaurant down the street is doing a lot of business, that doesn't mean I'm not going to get a lot of business. Rather, people might say this whole area is a good place to go and get a bite to eat. Let's see. Reaper says, every big corporation has a disaster preparedness plan. Inside each one should be a strategy for dealing with a major health crisis. Seems like we're blah, 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 singling out a person. Yeah, not going to talk specifics. But Reaper, I think I'll just say if you look into this particular individual and the things he's been involved with, he is not just like a neutral third any other party. He seems to be a major involved person. Hello says, same with militaries, to be fair. Like the U.S. probably has a basic plan on how to invade Canada if they have to. Yeah, so maybe like if, let's hypothetically, like China invaded Canada, does the U.S. probably have some kind of war game scenario planned out about how the U.S. will say, like, no, China, you don't get to take over Canada. We'll have a North American empire instead. Like, I wouldn't be surprised at all if there was tons of material about that. I haven't looked into it. The most detailed one is War Plan Red, made in the 1920s when relations got tense. Yeah, so I think, too, looking at a specific like this, you could see how if people think that certain things might happen, right? Then you might begin to develop the materials and stuff for particular scenarios that you think might happen, whereas something just seems totally not likely to happen, then you wouldn't invest the time, energy, and resources to develop a plan to deal with it. Like, I don't think we're developing, like, I don't know, the Hungarians are going to annex California or something. Maybe there's something that I don't know, but that just doesn't seem like it's on the table to me. Whereas on the other hand, you hear, like, in the news a lot of talk about, like, Taiwan and China. So, like, if China invaded Taiwan, how would the U.S. respond? Something like that, I think, would be something I'm assuming a lot of people in places of command and stuff have been discussing or making plans for. Ripper says Canada is scary. Yeah, they talk funny too. Okay. So, one interesting point, and this is going to relate with the metaverse stuff about all this war game kind of scenario thing, is how culturally embedded a lot of this game stuff is. And the game stuff, too, I'm going to say, is very also associated with artificial intelligence and robots. And I think chess is the perfect bridge to talk about this, where it's like, all right, in chess, whoever has the best computers could win at chess because of the nature of the game. So with the war games, of course, it's a more complex. You're actually trying to model a real-world system as opposed to just being an abstract game like chess, as we saw in the War Games Wikipedia page. But in a lot of science fiction and stuff, pop culture, science fiction being basically hand in hand these days, you're going to see tons of talk about virtual reality, robots and stuff, and how they all come together. So a classic movie that Reaper actually sent to me and I watched was this War Games movie. So a 1983 American Cold War science fiction techno thriller film. And we could just look at the basic premise. During a series of surprise nuclear attack drills, so a kind of wargaming exercise, a significant percentage of the United States Air Force Strategic Missile Wing controllers prove unwilling to carry out orders for a missile launch. These results convince John McCriddick, head of the systems engineering team at NORAD, that the launch control centers should be fully automated and require no human input. So that's an interesting plot bit. It's like humans might freeze up and not follow through and do what they're asked to do according to the war game scenario. So if you could have a fully automated system, a robot or whatever, press the button instead of the human doing the job, then perhaps you could ensure the strategic success of your plan better than if you had like fallible human actors. So control is given to a NORAD supercomputer known as WOPR, War Operation Plan Response, pronounced Whopper, like Burger King, programmed to continuously run war simulations and learn over time. So this is the idea of the adversarial AI learning, like a computer playing chess against itself. Okay, so anyways, I just bring this example up to show how this whole game of like war gaming, disaster, and then also video games, virtual reality, and robots. They all kind of converge, and they're related to each other. And for obvious reasons, you could see why would a military be interested in investing in like artificial intelligence technology or robot technology, so you could have a robot that does some sort of operation that a human might not want to do. For example, like Hello said, we probably wouldn't last 5 minutes in war without peeing our pants. I'm not going to deny that. Like, I don't think I'm ready to pull out a gun, and I don't want to shoot another person. But RoboDog from DARPA will not drop a drop of sweat. It will carry out and do that because of it doesn't have trauma or anything. It's not conscious, it doesn't think, so it could just like shoot a person. All right, so Hello and Reaper are talking about Canada, some wargaming stuff. Hello says chess is the least realistic of any model because it's a perfect information game. Both players can see everything happening. The real world is more like a prisoner's game or poker. Yeah, so that's a good example too. I guess poker is like the American official game where you keep your poker face, and then people can't. Are you good at bluffing? Do people know what you really have? But yeah, it's not like all the information's known. Hello says, talking of war plans, look up War Plan White on Wikipedia if you want to be more X-pilled on the elites. All right, I'll take a look at War Plan White, see what that's about. Okay, so just some more general things. So how do people find out? You come up with these war game scenarios, things like that. How is it that people make predictions about how people will respond, such that you could create a war game plan, a story that you think is actually going to work? One way that's done is through this technique called a trial balloon. So here's the definition. A trial balloon, or kite flying, is information sent out to the media in order to observe the reaction of an audience. And then here's a corporate connection here. It can be used by companies sending out press releases to judge reaction by customers, or it can be used by politicians who deliberately leak information on a policy change under consideration. So you could think, right, some company, for example, Facebook, now Meta, they released their metaverse. Do you think that they had no idea that there was going to be a lot of negative pushback and people calling it lame? I think they knew all these things, assuming they have like some halfway decent skilled analysts and stuff. I don't think it's much of a stretch to say that they would be able to know that Mark Zuckerberg is not very popular, and we released this announcement of the metaverse with these flying torso people, that a lot of people really aren't going to like this. So I think personally they probably have done their business equivalent of wargaming, and they knew that, yet they decided to go ahead and do that anyways, because even if they don't receive a lot of good feedback for them, it probably, like, really it doesn't matter for them. But maybe even from getting the response, the feedback from announcing themselves as Meta and stuff, this could have been a very useful exercise for them to do in order to get a lot of information. So in that sense, like, this whole trial balloon, right, was making the press release and even changing your name to Meta. Could you say that that's kind of a trial balloon in order to just find out more about people and how they're responding. And then maybe, like, I'm assuming that all those sorts of projects and stuff, the main things that Facebook has been doing, they've probably just been trucking along and continuing to work and develop on the very same products that they've been doing for a long time. But you do something like a press release, and through that you're able to get information about how people respond. So from a sort of information gathering perspective, people might say like, oh, epic fail, what a failed launch on Facebook's part. The Facebook, they might be saying like, oh, they still think that was a failed launch, but actually, we have all this information and we could see what people will and won't accept and so on and so forth. So like on this stream, for instance, I brought up Pokemon a number of times. And with Pokemon, I've said what Pokemon demonstrates is that people actually are willing and excited to embrace a lot of like AR, VR type stuff. And Pokemon shows that is the case. It's just that the way in which people accept and embrace these new technologies like AR, VR often comes under the guise of some sort of like just a fun, cute little distraction, something to do. That you accept rather than like rhetoric about how to revolutionize the future or something. Maybe like a super nerd will go and buy the new Oculus headset, but how you mainstream a lot of stuff is just like Pokemon, just something fun and little. Or we could look to it how smartphones and stuff got really popular. So at the beginning, you'll only have certain early adapters or people that are relatively wealthy to put out the money to get like the latest technology. But how did cell phones and stuff become like so widespread and popular? And I think like one big way in which they've become normalized for everybody is just through simple like messaging applications and like photos. So the social aspect, if they're useful for people and they could communicate and use them and it affords them this great convenience, then you could see how that easily becomes the vector by which something like cell phone technology is uptaken as normal. Whereas if you tried to do some other sort of strategy like emphasize different phones' processing speeds or something, your normal person doesn't care. But they will care about some other aspect of it. So this is just to say, when you're thinking about how do people figure out the moves to do with wargaming and stuff, one of the ways to do it is an apparent failure, right? Such as you could say meta press release or something, might actually be a kind of trial balloon strategy in which you gather a bunch of information and find out about what people will accept and how they will accept it. And then once you know how people respond to various stimuli, then you could apply what you learned in order to do more specific things. So like one thing I've mentioned on this stream, a stream or two ago, was like this whole idea of microchipping pets. So for over a decade, people have been microchipping pets. So what is a microchip? A microchip is a small electronic chip enclosed in a glass cylinder that is about the size of a grain of rice. The microchip itself does not have a battery. It's activated by a scanner that is passed over the area, and the radio waves put out by the scanner activate the chip. The chip transmits the identification number to the scanner, which displays the number on the screen. So you could look even at like how a FAQ is constructed. So FAQ, it's anticipating, right? Frequently asked questions, and probably they compiled this list with a lot of questions that people actually ask. So maybe it's like we offer the service, we could put an ID chip in your pet, and then people might have questions such as, how is this done? Is it painful? Does it require surgery? Because if it was really hard to do and they could see their animal visibly suffer, then like people would not want to do this, because who would want to like torture their beloved pet, right? So they say no, right? They use a needle, no more painful than a typical injection, so on and so forth. what kind of information is in there. Is there a tracking device? Will it store information? So then people might have some kind of privacy concerns. And then they assure you it's only the ID number. So it's not like your pet's becoming a hard drive. Rather, it's just like a name tag. So by introducing and saying, oh, look, this is really familiar. It isn't all that much different. It's just like a normal injection. You've had your pet get a shot. And then here, it's like it's just an ID number. Like you have a tag on your pet, whatever. Then all this stuff is like carefully prepared because they know, then someone reads something like that, then they might be, okay, yeah, it doesn't seem like that big of a deal, nothing to freak out about. Hello says, semi-related to all this talk on social harmony, what's your take on the 1992 LA riots? As a local who was there? Oh no, I'm not that old. I wasn't there at the riots. And I don't even know if we're allowed to say the 2020 riots there. I think we still call them the 2020 peaceful protests. Let's see. Mimtal says, you might be interested in the writer Jason Horsley. All right, we could take a look at him, see what he writes. He talks about the feedback generated by conspiracy counterculture is used for social engineering. Our reaction feeds the beast. Yeah, so good point here, and this is going right along with the trial balloon stuff, which is to say, oftentimes people will feel empowered, right, if they're given some sort of mechanism to show like discontent. So here, like, hello, I don't know about the LA riot specifically, but we could consider like in 2020 all these protests movements. It's almost like a concert, it's like you've been inside for a long time. Why don't you go outside and like rage a little bit? And you could study how at like concerts and stuff and Disneyland, like all sorts of things that people might think of, oh, it's just fun. These things that are, oh, just fun actually are like very useful information gathering events. And okay, you could even look at this like in a it doesn't even have to have like this whole conspiracy angle to it. Like, let me put it this way. Let's say you and your kids softball team, we're gonna have a bake sale to raise money for the softball team, okay? And then you have a bake sale, and you throw this event, and then you try and present all sorts of different items, like cupcakes, but then also maybe slices of pizza, like all sorts of different things. Then this could be a very useful event. It's not just about the bake sale and stuff. If you're clever about it, then you could also say like, oh yeah, okay, so we had this event at 11 a.m. It seems a lot of people actually really wanted the pizza. Basically, they just wanted to have a lunch. And the sweets and stuff actually didn't sell that well. So actually, maybe next time what we could try to do for our next fundraiser is just order pizza and have a kind of lunch event. And the pizza, they stack. It's very efficient. But having this pizza lunch, then that's actually the perfect efficient vehicle to raise the funds, so we could travel to this city together for a softball game. Okay, so that was like an extremely domestic, example of how these same sorts of techniques, I'm not saying that they're evil, they're bad. You could have just a totally legitimate, normal use of them, and you would say that that's prudence or good planning. If you were able to use those things successfully. But on the other hand, I do think it is worth noting that like high-level actors and stuff, we talk about like microchipping pets, and then we have like cyborg people in Sweden. Am I going to be surprised at all when finally it comes time where they're proposing that people get some sort of microchip? It's like, absolutely not. So they'll float the idea, and the first time it's probably going to be, a lot of negative reaction. But that's exactly what they want. They, it's not like, oh, we have this cool idea, will people accept it? It's like they know that they're going to get massive negative pushback for something, but from the patient, controller perspective, then they're saying, okay, we get all this pushback. What is the sort of nature of this pushback, and how do we address it? So like with the pet thing that we were looking at here, and looking at the FAQ. So like certain problems, that they're going to be able to say it's not an issue. So like, would anybody really refuse just an injection because they think it hurts too much? I would say that basically the answer to that is no, especially because we have all sorts of technology to do, like numbing and that sort of stuff. So if somebody really believed that some technology was useful, or they were required to get it, like I think if you visit certain countries, you have to get certain inoculations and stuff, then people will just do it. Like that pain of one poke isn't a problem. Basically, I'll put it that way. Now, on the other hand, some other issue like would be like a hard drive as it's storing all this information on me. I think for a lot of people, that itself would be a big turnoff. So like the answer with this pet thing here, how do you get people to sort of wave away that concern, where it's like, oh, it's just like an ID, and then you could say, oh, and you already have lots of IDs. Like the pet name tag was example for a pet, but like for you as a person, right? You might say to somebody, oh, you already have to show your driver's license a lot of places. You already have to show your social security number, something like that. So there's nothing new under the sun. This is nothing unusual or different from what you're already doing. Now that doesn't make it right, mind you. It doesn't mean you should do something just because it's already being done. But to say, if we're talking about kind of, put ourselves in the war gamer perspective and saying, how do we roll out certain policy, then you anticipate problems like that, such as someone saying, oh, I don't want it to store all this information. Then you have a ready answer. Oh, it's not going to store any information. It's just like an identification. It's just like you wear a name tag. You've worn a name tag before. So there's nothing new. All right. Yeah, and another question, should I be concerned about my privacy if my pet is microchipped? Will someone be able to track me down? Okay, so this is more specifically about the pet being related to the owner, so a more pet-specific thing. Then they talk about frequency, radio stuff. And, this bit's interesting. It's just a technical detail here. I would say to most people, these numbers don't mean anything. Like, I don't really know very much about radios and frequencies and that sort of stuff. So, like, I look at these numbers. It's not extremely informative to me. But I'll just put it this way, that by having this question and giving this concise, short answer like this, then this will also boost public perception that, like, oh yeah, it seems like, the American Veterinary Medical Association, they're just being transparent, straightforward, and giving you the facts, right? So you might even have a question. Maybe it isn't even a frequently asked question. Maybe it is. Like, I don't know about pet tracking technologies and stuff. But sometimes just by, for example, having a longer, if you only had like 2 questions in your FAQ, then somebody might be like, oh, are you hiding something? Whereas if they probably have like a specific number. If someone's doing this sort of thing carefully, well, they'll say like, okay, if we have between, a dozen and 2 dozen questions in the FAQ, then most people, they'll find the question they want answered within the first, 6 of the FAQ questions. But even if they don't find their answer in those first 6, to just know that there's like, 12 to 24 entries will be reassuring to people, and that they'll be able to see how, oh yeah, this looks like thoroughly researched, and these people are serious about doing a good job at what they're doing, and they've covered all their bases. Hello says, I love how they say you don't need to be concerned about your privacy, and in the same breath tell you about how you can opt out of newsletters and advertising, which means you're automatically opted in. Yeah, I'll probably share on Like if I start to get a bunch of ads on this browser I use for this stream about like, have you gotten a custom chip for your cat for the holidays? I wouldn't be surprised if I started to get all these, because let's accept the cookies. I agree. I want a better web browsing experience. What about you all? I think we like those experiences. Let's get a good web browsing experience. All right. So all sorts of questions. Anyways, what I'm basically just saying here is like in white collar land, right? When you have these sorts of documents and you talk about how you're informing your decisions based on analysts and their data and stuff, it'd be questions like I'm talking about, like, oh yeah, if we have this number of questions, then that's going to be something that will give people more confidence in our solution. If we like show a person in a suit that talks about it, then people will perceive that as more professional and authoritative, versus if we just have like slacker hoodie guy that's giving information, then it's like, oh yeah, then people won't as readily accept what that person has to say as true. And it could go the other way. Maybe the conclusion of some research will be like, oh yeah, if we have somebody that looks more like organics and grassroots, then actually that is something that will really like get people to identify with the program. So we could bring up like Greta Thunberg. She's supposed to be our relatable friend, person of the year. So got her by the ocean, looking inspired with some kind of floaty effect. Anyways, you see somebody like this, you know, of all the people in the world, so many people in the world doing so many different things, how and why is she there? So you could see, like, clearly she's parts of many campaigns. Here, the power of youth. So how do you, right, capture like young people to be inspired and interested in interfacing with heads of states at the UN, the Pope, and so on and so forth? If you could get people on board believing what she thinks is cool, then you also get people that are really happy and identifying with also to her associates, and so on and so forth. But yeah, a lot of organizations, including like probably most of our protests and stuff, you can imagine that there's a lot of wargaming and planning of storytelling and how people are going to react that go behind all of this stuff. All right. So let us go back here. Oh, and then another idea too of we're looking at some examples of trial balloons and how like the microchipping pets might be an example of like kind of getting an idea out there in the context of pets, and then naturally if it comes to people later, I'm not going to be surprised. We could look at other stuff where you have a particular audience, see if certain people are conditioned or ready for some idea. So I had this article sent to me, can we have a meaningful life in a virtual world? And then talks about the recent Matrix movie. And then this fellow, David J. Chalmers, he's a widely published academic philosophy of mind guy. Looks like he wrote a new book called Reality Plus. But he's written a lot of books. I personally have read some things from this one, A Philosophy of Mind, classical and contemporary readings. So if you think about how universities might be doing research and kind of preparing the way for these war game scenarios, and you know they do, that's why they get DARPA grants and all this sort of stuff. Then you say, what is the sort of philosophy of mind research for? Why do people want all these things, information on these things? And one thing that I might suggest, for instance, is, well, we need to find a way in order to make plugging people into the matrix, into a virtual world, acceptable to people. So you have a well-known and published academic, and then you start to put out these stories. You argue in your book that virtual realities have the potential to be just as rich and valid a place for people to exist in as real ones. But there's something that a virtual world might be missing that in your thinking could inhibit the pursuit of a meaningful life. So these articles, they're not quite the same as like a FAQ, and that the FAQ might be like really ready to make a concrete decision, like should I microchip my pet? But a lot of these interviews, they're similar in that they get people starting to think about and frame conversations in a particular way. So it's like, oh yeah, philosophy of mind. I remember that Chalmers guy. He was really smart. He was talking about how, is living in a virtual world, what makes us fulfill is ultimately like, I don't know, dopamine and serotonin and experiences. Then what's to say that we can't get those same experiences from a virtual world if the technology is up to par, and so on and so forth. So just like you might poke with a trial balloon, kind of find out people's reactions, then you could also start through these trial balloons as well, to begin to sow the seeds of ideas and ways in which you would like people to think about things. Because if something is more familiar to somebody, then they're a lot more likely to accept what they're being given. Hello says, that's the amazing story though, Alan. She got so far when she has selective mutism just from willpower alone. I actually haven't read the whole or watched all the Greta stories, but that's just to say, she's definitely elevated and raised up as a particular sort of leader for the future. So, I've never met her. I don't know her specifically, but certainly she is being used in particular agendas for particular purposes. All right. Anyways, bunch of questions over here. Oh, look at Chalmers with rocking a 80s hair with a brain. Chalmers in 1996 UC Santa Cruz Review. Okay, what a picture. A philosophy rock star. Here he is in Sydney. Cool. And then just couple questions here at the end. Does thinking so much about the nature of reality and consciousness, and sorry to put it crudely, ever freak you out? And he says, it happens less when I'm thinking about this stuff professionally, but absolutely there are moments where I'm conscious and somehow the world is present to me. How can this be? Or every now and then I'll look up in the mirror and say, why does this guy, David Chalmers, keep following me around? Every time I look in the mirror, he's there. That's kind of freaky. How did I get to be someone in the first place? And when you start thinking about simulations, what if the only person in the simulation is me? So kind of, how do I know solipsism isn't true? So, certainly you start to think about a lot of the ideas that are presented, like even this very stream, we're talking about the noble lie, right? Considering and saying like, are we being noble lied to? How do I know what's real, and so on and so forth? These are big important questions, right? If we're saying at the end of the day, you got to figure out how you want to live your life, what's important to you, what do you want to do, then to ask and to think about these things, in my opinion, is not stupid to ask what is the nature of reality. It's like not stupid to ask, because you ask, if life is just chaotic and it doesn't matter, well then I should just go have fun. But if that's wrong, if you're here in your life for a particular reason, well then it's up to you that you actually figure out what you're supposed to do, and that you do it. And in that sense, right, you see lots at stake. Okay, let us return to the topic. So, a lot of stuff going on. So let's just return really quick. So the topic here is the noble lie, myth or untruth, and then I've jumped in to explore some ways in which storytelling, information gathering, and wargaming is done to say, okay, is there a noble lie? And if there is, how is this noble lie presented to people? How is it that what is your entry point into believing and deciding to sit in the cave and watch the shadows? That's another way to put it. So, okay, I think I'll just talk about... Oh man, I wrote a bunch of notes. Okay, I'll just keep on going. We'll see what happens. So, a character I brought up a bunch of times in this stream, Sam Harris. He wrote a book called The Moral Landscape. And Sam Harris is famous for proclaiming that he is an atheist and promoting mindfulness, meditation, and stuff like that, which is very trending nowadays. So if you go and you look at, like, I've gotten emails from, like, my insurance company or whatever, and they're talking about wellness and mental health and all this sort of stuff, mindfulness, vague platitudes of wellness, everywhere, all over, I don't even have to tell you to look for them. You're probably getting bombarded with them, especially if you go to university or something. Anyway, so Sam Harris is like pro all that stuff, and he's written this book, The Moral Landscape, quite a while back. So we could actually check on Amazon, look at the year for it. So way back in 2011, so that's a decade at this point. So Sam Harris is known for this book, like The End of Faith, ignited a worldwide debate about the validity of religion. And he's a New York Times bestseller. Surprises anyone? I'll leave that for you all to decide. Anyways. So in this book, The Moral Landscape, then as an atheist, he wrote a book, End of Faith, stuff like that. Sam Harris proposes a kind of moral framework. How is it that we could navigate this very complicated reality we all have? Okay, Hello says, very interesting idea at the end there of the Chalmers articles, the solipsism stuff, and now Hello is going to sleep. Right, good night, Hello, good to see you. So let me just read this one paragraph, and then I'll talk a bit more about the moral landscape and an interesting idea that was sent to me that didn't have to do with this book directly, but still relates. So hang tight. So here's this paragraph. In this explosive new book, Sam Harris tears down the wall between scientific facts and human values, arguing that most people are simply mistaken about the relationship between morality and the rest of human knowledge. Harris urges us to think about morality in terms of human and animal well-being, viewing the experience of conscious creatures as peaks and valleys on what he calls a moral landscape. Because there are definite facts to be known about where we fall on this landscape, Harris foresees a time when science will no longer limit itself to merely describing what people do in the name of morality. In principle, science should be able to tell us what we ought to do to live the best lives possible. So, I've heard him talk about this book. So you could say like if you have these valleys and peaks and valleys of on this moral landscape, what does that mean? I mean, one kind of crude way of putting it is like you have some situations that are the worst possible so what you would call the worst possible outcome is just a bunch of people suffering for no reason at all. Whereas like better states would be there's less suffering. So it's a kind of utilitarianism in a way that he's presenting in this book. And I'm recalling this from like years ago when I looked into this and heard Sam Harris himself talk about his book. But it's this idea, right? There's all these different possible states in which human society might find itself with this moral landscape. So what is the role? What are we supposed to do as humans? Well, we want to navigate our societies on this moral landscape to find a relatively good peak, a good point on the moral landscape. All right, so here's why I bring this book up. A friend of the show had sent me this article here about a mathematical engineering type approach, hill climbing. So here I'll just read the first paragraph and say a bit about it to the less mathy audience. So in numerical analysis, hill climbing is a mathematical optimization technique which belongs to the family of local search. It is an iterative algorithm that starts with an arbitrary solution to a problem, then attempts to find a better solution by making an incremental change to the solution. If the change produces a better solution, another incremental change is made to the new solution, and so on, until no further improvements can be found. Okay, so Sam Harris, famous for marketing himself as an atheist. I don't know if he's actually an atheist or whatever, but that's what he says. And he talks about the problem of controlling the society. How is it that humans should do politics and all this? He describes it as moral landscape, right? You find a local peak that's better, and as humans, as we acquire more knowledge, we could be scientific in the sense that we could use intersubjectively verifiable measurements in order to determine this result is better than this result. Okay, so that's Sam Harris, the moral landscape. He calls himself a philosopher and a neuroscientist that's trying to discover to us how we should govern society scientifically in some respect. Okay, then we look at this hill climbing example. So what I'm going to say that this hill climbing is it's a particular sort of mathematical technique that says, how do you find the highest hill? So you could choose like how much area you're dealing with, but this would actually be the sort of numerical method that you would do to scientifically solve what Sam Harris calls this moral landscape problem. So you would apply techniques like hill climbing, and you would crunch numbers about, you would find some way to measure human well-being or something. So maybe it would be, people self-reporting, but it probably wouldn't be that. It would probably be like getting biometrics on cortisol levels, stress levels or something like that. And maybe you want to minimize the stress levels, something like that. And then you could do numerical, empirical science in the sense that you're doing something that different intersubjective people, right, could verify this data, and using that you could computationally, and what Sam Harris would probably call scientifically, solve this problem that he presents in this book, The Moral Landscape. Okay, so why do I bring this up? Just wait, it's all going to relate. So Sam Harris describes governance as a kind of navigation problem on this moral landscape. And I say, recall the etymology of the word cybernetics. Same with like cyberspace, computers, all of that sort of stuff. And we take a look at, we've got too many tabs open here. We take a look at the etymology of cybernetics, and that's from the Greek, kybernetikos, good at steering, a good pilot, where kybernao is steering, guiding, acting, a pilot. So the cyber governance model is like navigating the moral landscape. So to say, like, what is our ideal kind of scientific form of government, then right, it's like following the morality type system laid out in Sam Harris, The Moral Landscape, and the methodology that you do it, the science that you're doing it, might actually, in the end of the day, work out to be a kind of algocracy and stuff. Solving a navigation problem, maybe using some mathematics with algorithms of implementing some kind of hill climbing, mathematical optimization, local search techniques. And using that, this would be like the end nuts and bolts general methodology, like, not sketching the details, but just very broadly how somebody might try to organize an entire society. Okay, so let's bring that back to the noble lie. So the noble lie in politics, myth or untruth, often but not invariably of a religious nature, knowingly propagated by an elite to maintain social harmony or to advance an agenda. The noble lie is a concept originated by Plato and the Republic. So if you kind of accept my soft thesis that the noble lie of our day is technology and progress, then what would the sort of the religious character of that be? Here, the religious nature, an myth or an untruth thing, then that would be to say, if you actually believed that you could do a kind of moral calculus to somehow evaluate what states are morally better or worse, and then you could apply machine learning or whatever in order to optimize and solve for that problem, like take the model laid out in the moral landscape, then translate that to computers, and then solve it with hill climbing, and then implement it on blockchain technology. Wow! If you did all of that, then that might be the very form in which the noble lie, you tell people, look, now we've been making so much progress with science, technology, and so on and so forth, that we're able to govern and lead us all into a more equitable, happy society where there's more leisure and all sorts of this. And then slowly, through wargaming methodology, using trial balloons to get data, all this sort of stuff, then you could get people to, for example, let's just suppose you got everyone with some kind of microchip, but that microchip might be needed in order to, for example, get the data that is necessary to create the model for the moral landscape. So if everybody has a chip and then you're getting all of this data on people about, let's just say, cortisol, like stress levels, that sort of stuff, and then you're saying that you're making society better, the scientific basis for making society better is that people are less stressed, right? You have all these pieces that fit together to create the data model of the moral landscape, and then you have the decentralized autonomous organization or whatever that then steers the path of society in order to like optimize for a local better thing on the moral landscape. Okay, so there's some other topics I had, but I think the stream's getting kind of long, so I'll just skip to my closing notes and not introduce more topics. So of course, if anyone has any comments or questions, feel free to field them, but I gave a kind of grand thesis at this point about like a noble lie of our time, what I consider to be maybe the big noble lie of our time, and how it is that this thing is developed, propagated, and presented to people as a shadow show in many ways. So let me just skip down though to some kind of useful takeaways that I'm working on developing. So I'm figuring out, the more you learn, with more wisdom comes more sorrow in some way. You know things. It's like, okay, now I have some new information. What do I do with it? So what sort of stuff am I thinking about? Maybe one of the main concerns I'm thinking about is the commandment, right? Love your neighbor as yourself. So the way of this world is to use blackmail, guilt, corruption, and all manners of trickery to win in a Darwinian struggle. And this is going back directly to the sort of war game talk, right? It's just like us versus them, seeing a lot of struggle going on, fighting over various things. You could ask the question, who or what am I fighting or struggling against? And I think just a good general point is you're not struggling against your fellow human being. You're not struggling against your neighbor, right? You might be struggling against non-truth and the noble lie. You want to find out what's actually true and cling to that. But if your neighbor is like duped, for instance, your neighbor isn't your enemy. Your neighbor is just like being led astray. So as a kind of reminder of, and this could apply too for the elites. So there was a comment here of I think it was Hello, who was saying that the elites might even get kind of demonized, or like my response was the witch hunt scare idea, that sometimes people are afraid of talking about, like, and if you start talking about noble lie and stuff, then what will that conversation lead to? Will that lead to a kind of a witch hunt where everybody wants to like round up the elites and hold them responsible for what they're doing? And in my own view, I think that no, you don't have to do that. Of course, if you're in a position like you're a literal judge or a person on a jury, then you may be asked to make a call, make a decision on stuff. But like me, like I'm saying, don't do, you're not doing vigilante justice. That's not your job to do. So Reaper says, quote, "You're not struggling against your neighbor. I think Alan hasn't lived in enough places." I don't know. I've lived with all sorts of different people, and like certainly you'll encounter like conflicts with other people, right? But like, what is our job? To find like peace with other people, not to like defeat them in some sense. Like what we were talking about here, Hello gave the example of like a barber shop in Greece, where having two barbers isn't a problem, especially if there's a need for more people to give haircuts, right? There's an abundance of work. There's an abundance of resources. There's so much abundance. There's no need for us to steal or like take from each other, to put each other down, because the way that stuff works is it's not a zero-sum game of person against their neighbor. Though what I'm arguing about with noble lie land is that oftentimes the way that problems are modeled and that we're told how stuff happens is in this adversarial sort of context of, how to local defeat this and that. These people are bad, change their opinion, and so on and so forth. Whereas I'm saying I don't buy that. So some more stuff here. Practical stuff that I'm trying to do myself. So you could tell me if these are based or cringe takes. But here's one. If you learn something, don't be the "I told you so" person. The strength of the noble lie comes from pride. People who have attached themselves to cringe may be scared of turning around, speaking boldly what they know to be true, and so on. So don't make it harder for people to turn away from evil, okay? So let's say, for example, I believe that, Gil Bates is doing bad things to people, and I'm convinced that he's up to a lot of trouble. But let's say you really like Gil Bates. And then let's just say that you start to find out some disturbing new information about Gil Bates. And then you're like, oh man, maybe I was wrong about Gil Bates. I assumed that, Gil was like a good guy trying to help with all this technology. But now it seems like, he's a grifter and a con man. And it seems what he's doing is no good. I hope his, money empire collapses. Okay, then for me, right, then I would say what I shouldn't do is say to you, oh, I told you so. Why don't you just listen to me? Like that would be no good. Instead, it's like, okay, now that we're on the same page about something, then now we're allies. Now we work together on this, and we could like don't be like prideful or gloat in like knowing something, or even like dodging a bullet, like whoop, well, glad that wasn't me, right? Instead, we should like focus on trying to continue to learn more and then help each other, and don't gloat in some kind of quote unquote victory over your neighbor, because we're not in a struggle against each other, and we don't have to shame each other and do all that sort of stuff. All right. Another point, be wary especially of ideologies or systems of thought that elevate you. So, for instance, don't be like a freshman philosophy major. You go and you read Plato, and then you're like, this Republic book, this is great. If the world were organized like how Plato said, I would be the philosopher king. And you could be a soldier because you could bench press more than me. And you're just a lowly laborer. I also didn't like how you looked at me wrong the other day, so I'll make you clean toilets. You're the worst. And this other person, they could be like a little bit under me. They got some good points, but I'm the alpha philosopher king. I think that a lot of the times, ideas and stuff flatter us in a way, and that is how we could be taken in by a particular way of thinking or ideology. Like we think something that not because it's true, but because in some sense it makes us feel good. So I'll give like an example from my own experience. So like one of the things I like to do, and I have done for work, and I do for work sometimes, is like web programming stuff. Now, a lot of people, they really like the idea of saying like, I'm a programmer, so I'm a smart guy. We could look at pull up this YouTube images of the programmers again, right? So the idea of like me being an elite programmer, that's cool. But thinking that you're like elite hacksaw and stuff, then this could actually like blind somebody from the fact that like, oh shoot, actually I'm, building a surveillance state, or like I'm doing something that actually is quite troublesome, right? So the more we become attached to like a particular position or something, it could spell trouble for us if it makes us think that in some capacity we're better than other people. So like I'll give an example that I've encountered, especially with like STEM type people, so science, technology, engineering, math, right? A lot of people, they'll take on this sort of winner take all view, which is to say like, well, it looks like the future is science, technology, engineering, and math, and I'm in the top 5% of my class, and my school is really prestigious. So I guess the world's going the way of automations and robots. And what about all the other people? Do you care about them? It's like, oh well, I don't know. I'm just gonna study math, and I guess they could fight for themselves. Something like that. And that person, they might become. Well, you could say they lack empathy, they lack compassion or something. in that because you or they or whoever are well positioned in some regard, does that mean that some problem doesn't exist? So like one thing, for example, that really bothered me in graduate school, so I myself never had to go into any student debt. Thankful to parents and family and people who have allowed that to be so. But like one thing that bothered me in graduate school was I would know a lot of students and stuff that were like taking out a bunch of student loans and stuff, and eventually I couldn't do it. I was like, I can't sell this product to people if I think it's actually not going to be helpful to them. In fact, it would actually be harmful to them. So that's like right now, I just go on YouTube. You watch my videos if you want to watch my videos. If you don't, like, I'm not going to take your time against your will or waste your time or anything. Everyone's here watching this because they want to be me personally. I didn't force you to. I don't know. Maybe someone's like, here, you have to watch Alan's stream. They put you in a chokehold. But that's not on me. That's on that person. But yeah, another thing is, because somebody is in a particular position, then they might end up priding themselves on their own position, even if it's to the detriment of other people. So like for a while, I in graduate school and stuff, I was like, oh yeah, it's cool. I could tell people, what are you doing? It's like, oh, I'm in graduate school. Oh, you must be really smart, right? And feedback and stuff like that could be really damaging to people, in my view, because what happens is you sort of internalize and have a kind of pride that blinds you from looking at what might be actually true or not true about what you're doing. And it's up to everybody to decide what they're doing themselves to a large extent. But that's one thing I've been thinking about telling myself. Okay, a couple more points. Read the signs. So here on Alan's stream, we share observations of recurring patterns with one another. There's this image of the ostrich burying its head in the sand. Good look, ostrich burying head in sand. And the image is that there's all sorts of things happening in the world. A lot of it is unpleasant or difficult. So is the solution to that kind of to just ignore it and to go into the metaverse, to just give up on society and focus on your own thing? So I think, there's certainly a case sometimes like you get away, you go be by yourself, or it's just like you and your family somewhere in order to focus or something. I'm not saying that there's anything wrong about that, but I also think it's not good to be naively or willfully ignorant in order to better protect. Don't be naively or willfully ignorant in order to better protect yourself and those you care about. So, for example, like on this stream, I've talked about like Gil Bates and alluded to things about the health crisis, stuff like that. You could ask a question like this. Why would you do that? Are you just like tinfoil and just trying to pick on people or something like that? It's what I try to do. Maybe I don't always succeed at this, but it's saying, look, I want to learn about what's actually happening, especially if you're presented with all sorts of different options that could have really big consequences. If you go one way or the other, you want to get the correct information, do enough research that you could make a good decision about what you're doing. It doesn't pay to be naive or willfully ignorant. If you make a bad choice, what are you going to do? Say like, well, he told me so. It's like, well, yeah, you have a brain. It is true that person told you to go one way. But did you try to investigate it yourself? And if not, if it's an important decision, why did you not do that? So I think that sometimes here we touch on some topics that might not be super YouTube friendly, and even by doing these streams and stuff, I would say there's definitely some kind of risk. I don't really like the word risk because I don't want to imply a random probability generated universe. But it's risk in the sense that I do open myself up that suppose somebody did watch this and they're like, okay, he's on the naughty list. I don't like the things he said, so we're not going to work with him or something like that. There's a risk in that sort of sense, but even still, I think that it's important to look at those important things, even if you might come to a decision that does put you at risk in that sense. Because it's important, right? Running away or neglecting duty such that you don't mess up is not a valid get out of jail free card. And especially too, there might come a time for a lot of stuff where you're forced to make a decision. So if you're forced to make a decision and then you didn't do your research ahead of time, you're going to have to make a decision whether you like it or not. Why not just, as a problem presents itself, do your research so that you can make an informed choice about what you're being asked to do. All right. 2 more points. Learn how some storytelling is done. Look at what storytellers are ultimately trying to tell you. So, 2, here the title for this stream was The Noble Lie, but then the bulk of what we were talking about throughout this stream was various methods and techniques that people use in order to come up with effective stories and also like execute plans through telling stories that I assume people will only actually put money and stuff down on something if they think it'll succeed in some measure. So to understand like what are the mechanics of stories and stuff like that, I think that there's a universal human interest in this sort of thing. Like you could find all sorts of like quotes and stuff about the power a story has, or an idea, like the Inception movie. What could planting a little idea in something. So to understand not just the ideas, but then also too, how is it that people, including ourselves, come to assimilate and accept certain stories? I think that's important. So I'll give you like, I'm glad I do these streams, and like with Reaper and Hello, they gave me some pushback today, right? So it might be like, all right, Alan, you wrote a bunch of paragraphs here, but some of these ideas, it just seems like, you're assuming like conspiracy, right? It's too tinfoil and stuff like that. So is it that you're just trying to fit stuff into a convenient narrative and not reckon with certain facts or truths in order that you're happy that your story is coherent? And I think it's good for me, right, or for anybody to sort of hear and accept criticism of that sort, and to see like, okay, if I hold a particular view, do I actually understand it, or do I not really know what I'm talking about as much? So I'll go to one more section in my my document here that's related to this. So there's a number of different like quote unquote conspiracy theories. One of the more infamous or famous, depending what you think of these, is like flat Earth. Okay, for example. Now, I'll just say first off that there's all sorts of different ways in which people will talk about how or what way the Earth is flat, or not flat. So, for example, if I said from a perception basis, I walk out in a field and I perceive the world as flat, nobody is going to disagree with that, right? They'll say like, they might jump and say like, yeah, you see it as flat, but then there's curvature, whatever. But we all agree that there's a perceptual sense in which you go out and the Earth is flat. Okay, so there's like a non-dumb, just direct sense perception way in which that's true. Now let me give you an example of like an kind of absurd story that was put out by the mainstream medias. So here from the New York Times, there was a story put out about this group that's claiming that birds aren't real or something like that. I thought I had an archive link or something. No. Anyways, so basically there's this whole movement, I guess. I don't think it's real. I think it's made as basically like a story to sort of throw anybody that has any kind of dissent of the mainstream narrative is like, either you're just a troll, or like you're so stupid that you would actually believe that birds aren't real. So like here's a site, birds aren't real. There's like a Zoomer kid, and then birds charge on power lines and all. So it's obviously a kind of satirical, absurdist joke type thing here. So just talking straight, talking serious about this sort of topic. You could go and order a rotisserie chicken like at the market. You could go and feed ducks. So there's very material ways in which you could verify that like birds are real. Like locally not expensive. You could find tons and tons of photo with people with really fancy zoom lenses and all sorts of stuff to like verify stuff about birds. And you could talk to the bird watching society, and maybe these people even take you on a walk and you could see all sorts of birds together. So this whole like birds aren't real thing is very stupid. And I will suggest, I think it's like a kind of fake top-down thing to sort of try to lump together and discredit all sorts of kinds of dissent. Now, on the other hand, you could look at other so-called conspiracy theories. For example, you could say, are they spraying the skies with chemicals? Are cell phone towers harmful to people? And even stuff about like cosmology, space stuff. Now, these things, they aren't readily verifiable, checkable in the same way that like you could go down and buy a rotisserie chicken at the grocery store, right? The sort of debunks and stuff will be, it's like, well, yeah, these authorities present these numbers and they say this or this. Or it'll be like with all the cosmology stuff, for example, we have such and such image, and then like a supposed Photoshop or a photo in the sea of a whole bunch of heavily edited and CG things. So the nature of the evidence to like verify that birds are real is much different from the sort of evidence that you would apply to sort of disprove or debunk like all these other like hot topic conspiracy theories that you would get in trouble for talking about on a lot of the interwebs. A lot of the times, the sorts of stuff you would get in trouble for, the sort of data and evidence that you would actually be looking at would either be highly technical and difficult to interpret. Like, I'm not going to try to say anything about cell phone towers and stuff because I don't understand, the EMF radiation and, all of that sort of stuff. I don't know enough about it to be able to talk about it. But to like look at that sort of topic, or even like I was saying, Isn't it curious how, so much of data from space and stuff is just their images and photos, and we know about the capabilities of imaging software, videography, all these things. Are very suspicious. And why would you suppress a video, for example, of somebody zooming in on the horizon to show how a ship doesn't really disappear over the horizon or something like that? So I'm interested in actually knowing, what sort of information is out there, and the answers to like a lot of questions or issues of our day. And when I see something like an NYT story on like birds aren't real or something, I mean, it just seems like a generic kind of smear tactic for people asking and investigating very legitimate questions as like citizen scientists or something. Okay, Reaper says, if I'm hearing your words correctly, you keep referencing the noble lie. If you listen to yourself, perhaps a Freudian slip, but the concept of a noble lie is not about a singular concept. Yeah, I mean, I'm talking about like, that's why I was explicit in saying like I'm spelling out a kind of working hypothesis, thesis in this stream. The main noble lie of our era. So I'm saying like, suppose, Alan offers like a unifying theory or something about like the noble lie of our era, saying there's this concept, the noble lie. Now, how is that implemented, right? It's like programming, C++ class, implementation of objects. So I'm talking about maybe what is implemented as an object in our era that we cohabitate here. Reaper says, do you believe the planets in our solar system are real? Yeah, so here too, I'll return to this idea of like word concept thing. Okay, so even a question like, are the planets in our solar system real? Well, it depends what you mean by planets. Okay, that was a bad attempt at a Jordan Peterson voice. The idea here, though, is like, okay, obviously we could all agree on a particular observable phenomenon. So, are there lights in the body or lights in the night sky that you could track and follow that have particular properties? So there's actually this old term for what we now often call planets, called the wandering stars. And actually I'll bring up to the Chinese term for planet is interesting. So the Chinese term for planet, this xing, it literally means something like moving star. So the empirical evidence we know about is there's these things called celestial bodies that we could observe in the night sky. But what exactly the nature of those things, what exactly they are, I would say that is not extremely as clear-cut as it's put out to be. So many of the images that we have of planets, for example, these, I mean, they were CG'd. And, everybody would say that they're CG'd too. This is not saying like, oh, it's not a photograph, they're CG'd. I mean, like, they're composed in a way on a black background. So it's at least an edited photo in that sense. But you could go ahead and like look up stuff, for example, have people zoomed in with like regularly available optical equipment and taken pictures of these things. So a lot of stuff we have, like here, asteroid collision, I mean, they just tell you it's an artist concept. So no one's claiming that that's like a photograph. Or like this. No one is claiming that that's a photograph. Now these things, the sources, then I think that like the space agencies and stuff will claim that those are actually photographs. anyways, to get back on point, this idea. So, do I think that the solar planets in our solar system are real? Then I think that there's no denying that there are certain celestial bodies that were previously referred to as wandering stars, like as reflected in the Chinese term xing xing. And you could look at the history of how people have considered these things and named them differently. So our current, mainstream most popular model is you have the sun in the middle, and then the different planets, and they're at different, distance from the sun, and so on and so forth. But yeah, you could look here. Like, let's just read this. Humans have observed planets for at least 4,000 years. We know that the ancient Babylonian astronomers recorded the cycles of Venus, Mercury, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn, ascribing meanings to their positions in the sky. Occasionally, the sun and moon were also included in this list of planets visible to the naked eye. Each planet, including the sun and moon, was associated with a god. So, like in ancient times, you would have celestial bodies, lights in the sky. That's where the sun and the moon would be grouped here together. And then these planets, Venus, Mercury, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn, which are named after Greek or Roman gods. They translate between the two. Right, and then we have the current official cosmology then describes the nature of these things differently. So before, people wouldn't say like, oh yeah, Jupiter is a gas giant or whatever. They would talk about the planets. They would talk about their positions and stuff, and maybe seasons and things that they marked. But a lot of the information that we have about these now is a relatively new claims. And what will be the methodology? People will say something like, we take about the color of them, and then we infer from that it has this composition of elements and so on and so forth. A lot of mathematics and models involved. Though for us, just normal people with the naked eye, and less so with a lot of light pollution and other things making it difficult to look at the night sky, the shared observable reality, such as how do we know that birds are real? Well, you could go out and you could see birds and you could eat them. In the same way, how do you know that planets are real? Well, we know that they're real in the sense that you could look up, you could find them, and we have information about where you could see certain ones, and so on and so forth. Okay, Reaper says, if we are true to ourselves, then just like we would analyze an event and ask who might it benefit, we should ask who might benefit to say that our understanding of planets is not what science says. My last question, if Elon Musk lands on Mars and creates a colony, will you then accept all the normal narratives about Mars planets that we are told? So, Reaper, I would say that we have to look at the nature of the evidence that we are presented for these certain things. So, for example, okay, if you believe that the moon landings did not happen, let's just suppose you don't believe that happened. Then if NASA went ahead and claimed, oh, okay, and now we landed on there again, do you believe them? Or do you think that they're just working on a pile of deceptions? And you could say that the only way that we do know, we could only verify what they say is by like their own websites and words and their own reporting. So if we were told Elon lands on Mars, okay, so of course I'll be careful with the language here, right? If Elon Musk actually did land on Mars and create a colony, and it was as all these models and stuff predict, and I somehow knew that, right? Then of course I should accept that the previous account and all this was right. Now on the other hand, if I was told that he did that, and I was like just like now we're told that there was like a rover and stuff that landed on Mars, just because I'm told something doesn't mean that I automatically accept that and relay that as fact. So what I can relay as fact is like, this organization reports that such and such, but I myself am not going to relay their message and say, oh yeah, this happened. Instead, I'll relay the message and say, they report that this happened, and I could understand their official story, but that doesn't mean that I accept it. I'm just reiterating the story, the details, as they have said it, and I do not confirm it myself. Reaper says, I think if they faked it, they would never fake it more than once. I don't know. If someone's a chronic liar, they could lie a bunch of times. I don't see what's surprising about that, especially if you're like doubling down on your position. Are they just going to say like, whoops, actually, we've been taking billions and billions of dollars, but actually that was all fake. Like, would they do that? I don't know. I'm not their PR department. They aren't paying me. So it's not for me to decide. Reaper says, because if you faked it, you wouldn't want to bear the burden of risk of being discovered by trying to claim you did it multiple times. This seems to be a very, very strong argument in my mind. I'll just say one thing on this topic to finish this discussion. So one of the things about like the nature of a lot of organizations is kind of compartmentalization, right? So you pull up MS Paint here. So if you have like, a core group here that comes up with some idea, then they might issue instructions to all these groups. Now, what happens is that the people in all of these, oh no, I'm trying to get too fancy. The people in all of these different groups below the head, let's make the head cabal the black square of people that actually have to do some kind of, these people actually have to lie in some capacity. Then you could have all these people downstream. They actually don't have to so much lie as transmit the message that they're given. So these people might say, like, let's just say we'll use landing on Pluto as an example, okay? They said we landed on Pluto, okay? And then this person's job, they're paid, $80,000 a year to create hype, to create websites that say like, oh yeah, these people landed on Pluto, right? So let's assume these people, they don't even have to lie. They just believe what they're told, and then they popularize that. And then like below them, then let's just say you have like all these news orgs and stuff. And then they'll take this reliable source and say like, oh yeah, these people, they're directly connected, so they're a reliable source. And then they go ahead and they relay what this person says. So at the end of the day, right, you only need like a very, very few people to actively do some kind of active deception. Or, it might not even, for sake of hypothetical, let's just say it doesn't even have to be a person. Let's say you set up like some crypto blockchain thing such that this news source, this is actually all AI. This is not even a person or a thinking entity. It's just a system that optimizes for like writing exciting stories, okay? So this thing like comes up with some exciting story or narrative. It's not even a person. So now I'm saying like you don't even have to have any person that lies or makes something up. This could actually just be an AI that creates like Associated Press or whatever, okay? So this is the AI, and then it passes it down to these people, and then if these people, they trust whatever the source is coming from, and then they rely on it, then actually you don't have any people that are even lying. No person is actually lying. But what you do have, though, is people that are willing to relay messages and to present things as facts that they don't themselves know to be fact. They're repeating hearsay. So it could be through official channels, through whatever, but ultimately what they're doing is they're repeating hearsay. So what I'm saying about that is, like if I meet someone who like likes NASA or like even works for NASA or whatever, right? I'm not going to be like, oh, you're a scammer, you're a liar, you're taking taxpayer dollars. Like, I'm not going to say that to somebody if they're like working with or for one of these organizations, because the structure of the thing might be, this person says, what do you want to do? Well, I want to make the world a better place, and here's an exciting, cool place to work, and I do my job. Look, I make them a really cool website. Or like I set up these, banners, and I throw these events to get kids excited about science, whatever. Like, who knows? Maybe you'll marry a science teacher. I don't know. I don't know what will happen in the future. So that could be the very organization that happens. And then you could see how a lie, a deception, right? It doesn't need very many active agents doing anything bad. It doesn't even need anybody theoretically actively lying. All you need is that people are willing to relay certain messages downstream. And if the nature of your organization is such that you have all this compartmentalization built in purposely, then that naturally is how stuff gets disseminated. So let's see. Reaper says, every time someone says cabal, I momentarily get excited. We are going to talk about kebabs. Yeah, I like a good kebab too. That sounds good. Reaper says, oh, you're talking about AI involved in the noble lie. Yeah, so here we could bring stuff around back to, like we could talk about the film like The Matrix or whatever, right? So let's just say that, there is a Matrix-like scenario. And actually, all these people, let's suppose at a certain point that they're actually AIs that are making these shadow shows for the people. And then it could be like at one point you had somebody that set up the whole Plato's cave scenario. But then, the original person that intentionally lied, let's say they die off. So now all that's left is this particular system. And that system is operating maybe with some human manager types, but their job is really just to relay information. They're not actively like coming up with new tricks and stuff themselves. But you could have a system that continues to perpetuate the noble lie in the sense of like a shadow show, push a particular program, something like that, and do it autonomously. And that's one reason why I found stuff like these, the decentralized autonomous organizations, interesting. Because the whole idea of this is, even if there aren't any people involved, right? You could have financial entities or whatever that are operating and acting and continuing to fund and push a thing, even if you don't actually have people actively involved anymore. So all you need is people to kind of build out the system. And then if you let the system just run on the financial and the legal system, whatever, then it kind of takes on a life of its own. And I put life in quote marks because, of course, I'm not talking about a living and breathing thing, but a kind of self-perpetuating autonomous thing. And this isn't like making stuff up in the sense that the very name of these things is decentralized autonomous organization. So I'm just saying like the very thing it's actually set up to be able to do. And here we'll just read this definition. The decentralized autonomous organization, one of the major features of digital currencies is that they are decentralized. This means they are not controlled by a single institution like government or central bank or even a person, but instead they are divided among a variety of computers, networks, and nodes. In many cases, virtual currencies make use of this decentralized status to attain levels of privacy and security that are typically unavailable to standard currencies and transactions. So the DAO, organization created by developers to automate decisions and facilitate cryptocurrency transactions. So imagine if like you design a DAO and it's able to successfully keep itself funded. So if the DAO, let's say it's a company and its job is to continue to create information and materials about Pluto research. So let's suppose that no one actually went to Pluto or anything, but you have a DAO that's set up, and basically it's able to fund itself through, interest, selling merchandise, through print on demand, like whatever it's able to do in order to do that. And also as a organization, right, it's able to hire people and also get the necessary human work to be done. So you have a DAO. You don't even need to have anybody actively lying or whatever to perpetuate a falsehood. Instead, what you have is an autonomous organization that is able to keep on pushing a particular program, and is by its nature, it's designed to be autonomous and independent in this regard. So there could still be like human input in the sense, but then you could have a DAO or whatever that's built in order to have like human interaction with the DAO in many ways. Cool. Reaper says, "Oh, now the way you describe the system made by the ancients sounds like fantasy fiction." Well, thank you for joining Alan's stream, Fantasy Fiction Plato Reboot Edition. It's been a good stream, but I think I actually have to go now. So thank you all for joining. Feel free to leave comments and do all that.